What would you do if a single hour of your life completely erased the quiet future you spent years trying to build? At exactly 9:12 a.m., the Oak Ridge Memorial Emergency Department took a devastating hit that by all accounts should have left 7 families preparing for funerals. Before the doors burst open and the chaos begins, take a second to hit that like button. Drop a comment letting me know what city you are watching from. And subscribe so you never miss another deep dive story, because what happens next changes everything. 7 critical trauma patients flooded the bays in under 5 minutes, with the primary attending surgeon completely trapped in gridlock on Interstate 90, leaving a rookie nurse named Maya Vance standing directly in the doorway with hands that did not shake the way a beginner's hands normally do. The official hospital records state that she miraculously saved 7 lives in a span of 60 minutes, but what the public administration completely leaves out of the official narrative is what transpired immediately afterward. 2 tall individuals dressed in dark, formal suits walked straight past hospital security, flashed official federal badges, and demanded to see her by name, acting as though they had been hunting for this exact moment far longer than the multi-car accident victims had been bleeding out on the asphalt. If you have ever felt completely helpless while watching a loved one fight for their life in a chaotic hospital corridor, I need you to stay with me through this entire video, because this is not just a standard medical rescue story. This is a high-stakes war story hiding directly beneath the sterile, humming fluorescent lights of a modern city hospital. The presence of those dark suits and official federal badges felt entirely surreal against the heavy, overwhelming smell of medical antiseptic and burning plastic, looking as though an entirely separate, darker world had been dragged straight into the trauma bay. But the cold truth was that Oak Ridge Memorial had been carrying the weight of that hidden world all morning long. It simply had not shown its true face to the public until now. Earlier that morning, during the standard shift change, the emergency department sounded almost peaceful. You could hear the predictable chimes of the elevators, the soft, rhythmic squeak of rubber shoe soles against the polished tiles, and a distant supply cart rattling over the grout lines. A heavy autumn rain tapped against the large glass windows in a steady, unbroken rhythm, effectively turning the sprawling parking lot outside into a blurry sheet of dark gray. In the crowded staff hallway, the small coffee station was already surrounded by exhausted medical workers holding paper cups, utilizing the quiet morning ritual to convince themselves they were truly prepared for whatever disaster decided to roll through the double doors. Maya Vance did not reach for a cup of coffee. She walked straight past the gathering crowd with her backpack held tightly against her side, her eyes focused entirely forward, moving through the corridor with an unspoken confidence that made it seem like the entire hallway belonged to her. Even though her identification badge still looked brand new, the plastic clip was completely unscuffed, the photo was clearly recent, and the bright blue letters reading R.N. sat directly beneath her name. Below that title, in much smaller print, the hospital administration had added a line meant to be encouraging to newcomers. Emergency Residency Program. That specific title clung to her like an inventory label on a brand new piece of medical equipment, serving as something useful for institutional tracking, but completely useless for defining the truth of who she actually was. She came to a halt at the corner just outside Trauma Room 2 and waited for a brief moment. She did not stop because anyone was blocking her path, but because her analytical eyes had already instinctively measured every single detail of the intersection. She noted the exact position of the security camera mounted above the vending machines, the wide convex mirror hanging at the far end of the corridor, and the faint reflections in the glass of a framed corporate poster that read, "We see you. We value you." She watched those reflections with absolute focus, the exact way other people mindlessly stare at their smartphones. A respiratory therapist pushing a heavy equipment cart hurried past her and offered a quick nod, saying, "Morning, Maya." "Morning," she replied simply, and the single word came out with an even, deeply grounded calm, sounding as if she had spent years practicing how to speak under immense pressure without letting her voice waver. She stepped into the quiet locker room, changed into her standard blue medical scrubs, and securely tied her long hair back with a plain, unadorned black band. She wore absolutely no jewelry, no perfume, and no decorative items of any kind. She slid her identification badge directly over her front pocket, tugging on the plastic clip twice to guarantee it would not catch on anything during an emergency. When she stepped into her work shoes, She laced them incredibly tight, enough that the tough leather creaked under the tension. On her left forearm, located just an inch above her wrist cuff, a faint, jagged line of old scar tissue ran pale against her skin. It looked incredibly old and meticulously clean. The exact kind of physical scar that had finished healing a long time ago, but would never truly be forgotten by the body that endured it. Out on the main clinical floor, the charge nurse was already actively at war with the demands of the day. Colleen Hayes stood at the central nurse's station like a solid lighthouse built entirely out of pure grit. She was in her late 40s, possessed incredibly sharp eyes, and wore her hair pulled back so tightly that it looked genuinely painful. She held a metallic clipboard firmly in one hand, and a ringing phone in the other, seamlessly switching her attention between the two without losing a single word of her conversation. "No, I hear exactly what you are saying," Colleen stated firmly into the receiver, her voice remaining perfectly polite, but completely lethal. "But if you want that patient moved upstairs to the floor, you are going to have to come down here yourself and explain to the terrified family why there is no bed available, because I am absolutely not the one who is going to do it for you." She ended the call with a sharp click and turned around just as Maya approached the desk. "You are incredibly early," Colleen observed, narrowing her eyes. Maya stopped right at the edge of the wooden station. "I couldn't sleep." Colleen looked her up and down slowly, not out of cruelty, but like an experienced craftsman assessing the durability of a tool before trusting it with a heavy workload. "You are assigned strictly to monitors and intravenous lines today. You are in a support role. Absolute entry-level tasks, Maya. No cowboy stunts in my department." Maya blinked once, her expression unchanging. "Yes, ma'am." Colleen's intense gaze stayed fixed on her for another second too long. "And Vance?" "Yes. Don't try to impress anyone today. Just do the basic job you were hired for." Maya's mouth formed a slight shape that almost became a smile, though it never fully materialized. "Understood." She stepped completely into Trauma Room 2, where the chilled air always carried a faint, metallic edge that no amount of industrial cleaning product could ever fully erase. The large bay was completely quiet for now, stark and waiting with a sterile patience that felt more like an unspoken threat than a sanctuary. She went straight to the massive emergency crash cart. Most medical professionals checked the inventory of the cart like it was a boring bureaucratic requirement, but Maya checked it like it was a solemn promise. She broke the plastic security seal, carefully counted every single syringe, pressed the power button on the laryngoscope light twice to test the bulb, and then pulled out the batteries to inspect them anyway. Her fingers intuitively found the wrapped scalpel without her even having to look directly at the tray. She lifted the heavy bag valve mask and squeezed it firmly once to accurately gauge the physical resistance of the rubber. She traced the clear oxygen line all the way to the main wall outlet, giving it a sharp tug to confirm it was solidly locked into place. Jared Cole, the young surgical resident assigned to the trauma service for that specific block, walked into the bay with a digital tablet tucked under his arm and a half-eaten protein bar held in his hand. He was still young enough to genuinely believe that physical exhaustion was merely a temporary condition that could be overcome with willpower. His white lab coat was immaculate, and his stethoscope was entirely too shiny. He stood and watched Maya's methodical movements for a moment before speaking up. "Do you always check the inventory exactly like that?" Maya did not look up from her work. "Like what?" "Like you are performing a pre-flight military check on a fighter jet." That specific comment made her pause. Not for long, just long enough for the tension in the room to subtly shift. She carefully set the bag valve mask back down on the metallic surface. "I check it like I actually want it to work when a life depends on it." Jared swallowed the rest of his food, nodding slowly. "Fair enough." He flipped open his digital tablet, scrolling through the schedule. Dr. Vance is officially in the building. He is conducting his quick morning rounds before heading upstairs for the main administrative budget meeting. Maya's hands had already moved smoothly to the specialized supply drawer. She checked the chest tube insertion kits, ensuring they were all present and perfectly sealed against contamination. She slid the drawer shut with immense care, acting as though making unnecessary noise was a severe mistake. Jared leaned his back against the counter, continuing to talk. "Did you hear about the brand new institutional policy they're trying to implement? Administration wants the trauma department to reduce the total time from patient arrival to diagnostic imaging by exactly 12%. Maya finally glanced up at him, her eyes cold. And what happens when rushing to imaging makes an unstable patient significantly worse? Jared shrugged his shoulders. The classic gesture of an academic who was entirely used to rules being written by corporate executives who had never actually seen a human being bleed out on a floor. Then you document the clinical rationale in the computer and hope your digital note protects your license from a lawsuit. Maya turned completely away from him, checking the wall suction parameters. Notes don't stop a massive internal hemorrhage, Dr. Cole. Jared's eyebrows lifted high in surprise. You talk like someone who has seen a massive amount of field trauma. Maya's face remained entirely blank, devoid of any readable emotion. Everyone who works in a level 1 trauma center sees things. That's clearly not what I meant, and you know it. Maya did not offer an answer. She moved directly to the physiological monitor, ran a rapid diagnostic systems check, and then adjusted the baseline alarm volume slightly higher than the standard factory setting. She did it completely without noise. Acting as though she did not want anyone else in the department to notice, she had altered the parameters at all. Out in the main hallway, the heavy, deliberate stride of Dr. Garrett Vance announced his arrival long before he actually crossed the threshold of the room. He was the specific type of veteran trauma surgeon who did not waste words, and more importantly, did not allow anyone else to waste them in his presence either. His short hair was dark gray with bright silver streaks running through the temples, and his eyes possessed a sharp, penetrating quality that naturally caused people to stand up straighter without even realizing they were doing it. He carried his clinical authority like a finely honed scalpel, never loud but incredibly precise. He stepped directly into the bay and took in the entire state of the room in one single, sweeping glance. "Morning," Dr. Vance said, his voice deep. "Good morning, Dr. Vance," Jared replied instantly, squaring his shoulders. The veteran surgeon's gaze slid directly past the resident and landed on Maya. He did not bother to greet her by her name. He did not need to. Instead, his eyes dropped to her hands. On the stainless steel counter right next to her lay an open pack of medical gloves. She had pulled a pair out, stretched the rubber firmly between her fingers once to test the structural integrity and fit, and then set them down again, looking as if she were waiting for an event that only she could hear coming. Dr. Vance's voice was perfectly calm. "What is your specific assignment for the shift today, nurse?" Maya met his sharp eyes without flinching or looking away. "Support role, doctor. Monitors, intravenous lines, and digital documentation." Dr. Vance nodded his head once. "Support is exactly what keeps people alive when the world falls apart. Don't let anyone in a lab coat tell you otherwise." Colleen appeared suddenly in the open doorway, looking as if she had been standing there listening to the entire exchange. "She knows her exact lane, doctor. I made sure of it." Dr. Vance did not look away from Maya. "Does she really?" Maya's throat moved slightly as she swallowed. "Yes, sir." The surgeon held that heavy silence for an entire second, letting it hang in the air. Then he turned sharply to Jared. "Let's begin rounds." They walked out into the corridor, leaving the trauma bay completely quiet once again. Maya exhaled a long, slow breath through her nose. She did not look relieved by their departure. Instead, she looked exactly like an experienced tracker who had just confirmed the precise direction of a gathering storm. By 8:30 a.m., the main emergency department had quickly filled with the standard baseline of urban misery. There was a teenager nursing a deeply lacerated hand from a chaotic kitchen accident, a middle-aged man complaining of severe chest pain who loudly insisted it was nothing more than temporary heartburn, and an elderly woman with profound dizziness and overwhelming fear visible in her pale eyes. The waiting room television played a bright morning talk show that absolutely no one was actually watching. The conditioned air was entirely full of the low, vibrating hum of human anxiety, the specific kind of tension that never truly left a hospital floor, even on the best of days. Maya moved through the chaos with steady, unbothered competence. She placed large-bore intravenous lines cleanly on the first attempt, spoke gently and directly to panicked family members without promising a single outcome she could not guarantee, and documented every single set of vital signs with crisp, legible handwriting. She did not complain about the workload, and she did not linger to chat. At one point in the morning, she paused next to a thick glass security door that led directly into the ambulance bay. Outside, the heavy rain had softened into a thick, low-hanging mist. The city streetlights were still glowing brightly despite the fact that the sky had lightened into daytime. A police cruiser rolled past the entrance incredibly slowly, its tires making a loud hissing sound over the wet asphalt. For a brief moment, Maya stopped completely and watched the reflections in the glass. Colleen's loud voice suddenly cut straight across the noisy hall. "Vance, I need a supply run immediately. Trauma room 1 needs more pressure bags right now." Maya turned around instantly. On it. She walked rapidly to the central supply room, where the intense smell of plastic packaging and chemical disinfectant was significantly stronger. The cheap fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. She reached up to grab the heavy pressure bags from the top shelf, then paused completely when she heard Colleen step into the small room behind her. "You are incredibly quiet today, Vance," the charge nurse said, leaning against the doorframe. "I am always quiet." Colleen snorted loudly. "No, you are quiet like someone who is actively listening for some." "Does she really?" Maya's throat moved slightly as she swallowed. "Yes, sir." The surgeon held that heavy silence for an entire second, letting it hang in the air. Then he turned sharply to Jared. "Let's begin rounds." They walked out into the corridor, leaving the trauma bay completely quiet once again. Maya exhaled a long, slow breath through her nose. She did not look relieved by their departure. Instead, she looked exactly like an experienced tracker who had just confirmed the precise direction of a gathering storm. By 8:30 a.m., the main emergency department had quickly filled with the standard baseline of urban misery. There was a teenager nursing a deeply lacerated hand from a chaotic kitchen accident, a middle-aged man complaining of severe chest pain who loudly insisted it was nothing more than temporary heartburn, and an elderly woman with profound dizziness and overwhelming fear visible in her pale eyes. The waiting room television played a bright morning talk show that absolutely no one was actually watching. The conditioned air was entirely full of the low, vibrating hum of human anxiety, the specific kind of tension that never truly left a hospital floor, even on the best of days. Maya moved through the chaos with steady, unbothered competence. She placed large-bore intravenous lines cleanly on the first attempt, spoke gently and directly to panicked family members without promising a single outcome she could not guarantee, and documented every single set of vital signs with crisp, legible handwriting. She did not complain about the workload, and she did not linger to chat. At one point in the morning, she paused next to a thick glass security door that led directly into the ambulance bay. Outside, the heavy rain had softened into a thick, low-hanging mist. The city streetlights were still glowing brightly despite the fact that the sky had lightened into daytime. A police cruiser rolled past the entrance incredibly slowly, its tires making a loud hissing sound over the wet asphalt. For a brief moment, Maya stopped completely and watched the reflections in the glass. Colleen's loud voice suddenly cut straight across the noisy hall. "Vance, I need a supply run immediately. Trauma room 1 needs more pressure bags right now." Maya turned around instantly. On it. She walked rapidly to the central supply room, where the intense smell of plastic packaging and chemical disinfectant was significantly stronger. The cheap fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. She reached up to grab the heavy pressure bags from the top shelf, then paused completely when she heard Colleen step into the small room behind her. "You are incredibly quiet today, Vance," the charge nurse said, leaning against the doorframe. "I am always quiet." Colleen snorted loudly. "No, you are quiet like someone who is actively listening for some." Maya kept her eyes fixed firmly on the shelf. "I listened to the floor." "The floor?" Colleen repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "The baseline sounds of a hospital always change right before things go catastrophically bad," Maya said, her voice dropping. She lifted the heavy pressure bags down and turned around to face the veteran nurse. "You can easily hear it coming if you actually pay attention to the shifts in energy." Colleen stared at her for a long beat, then shook her head quickly, looking as if she were annoyed at herself for being genuinely curious. "Look, Vance, I don't care if you were the absolute valedictorian of your entire nursing school class. Or if you can start a central line with your eyes completely closed. This is Oak Ridge Memorial. We do things by the book, the right way. The formal chain of command exists for a critical reason. Maya held the heavy plastic bags tightly against her chest. And what happens if the chain breaks? Colleen's facial expression tightened instantly. It doesn't break. Maya's eyes did not blink. Chains break all the time. Colleen's voice dropped down to a harsh whisper. Are you standing here telling me that you won't follow direct orders from a physician? Maya shook her head slowly. No, ma'am. I am telling you that if a human being is actively dying right in front of me, I am not going to wait for an administrative committee to decide they are allowed to live. The small supply room suddenly felt incredibly cramped. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights grew noticeably louder. Colleen stepped forward, aggressively invading Maya's personal space the exact way a veteran charge nurse did when she wanted to firmly remind a beginner who ran the floor. Listen to me very carefully, Vance. If you decide to freelance or play the hero in my trauma bay, you put every single one of us at massive risk. You risk our medical licenses, our careers, our hospital, and our patients' lives. Everything. Maya's voice remained perfectly calm, completely unbothered by the intimidation. The patients are already at risk the moment they cross the threshold. Colleen's eyes narrowed into slits. Where exactly did you work before you applied here? A very small clinic, Maya said simply. What kind of small clinic teaches a beginner to talk like an absolute combat commander? Maya did not offer an answer. She smoothly slipped past Colleen's shoulder with the pressure bags and walked directly back onto the main clinical floor. Colleen stood frozen in the supply room, watching her walk away. A deep frown carved into her face, as if she had just seen a shadow move the completely wrong way in the dark. Upstairs on the top floor, Dr. Vance sat in a plush administrative meeting that felt like a completely different kind of battlefield. The massive conference room was completely full of tailored suits, complicated financial spreadsheets, and polite, empty smiles that never actually reached anyone's eyes. An executive was talking at length about institutional efficiency, while another was going on about annual capital budgets. Dr. Vance's smartphone sat directly on the polished wooden table right in front of him, face up, completely silent. He glanced down at it every single minute regardless. He absolutely hated being away from the trauma deck. He detested the underlying sense that critical time could move forward without his direct supervision. When the boring meeting finally concluded, Dr. Vance stood up instantly, pocketed his phone, and headed straight for the staff elevators. Just as he stepped inside the metallic car, the device vibrated violently in his pocket. It was a text message from Colleen. It read, "Trauma is quiet, but something feels completely off down here." Dr. Vance read the text once, then read it again. He rapidly typed back a response. "On my way down right now." The elevator descended with a slow, heavy inevitability. When the doors slid open onto the emergency floor, the familiar smell hit him instantly. Disinfectant, fresh blood, and raw human fear. He felt his entire body instantly settle into the exact place where he belonged. "Doctor," Colleen called out, already walking rapidly toward him the moment he stepped off the elevator. "We have a couple of stable patients in the back, but I don't like the current vibe of the room at all." Dr. Vance's mouth twitched, not quite forming a smile. "The vibe, Colleen?" The charge nurse's eyes did not soften in the slightest. Heavy doors were thrown open. People began moving rapidly without being told what to do, because the language of an absolute mass casualty disaster was one that the emergency room spoke with absolute fluency. Colleen's voice snapped into immediate command mode. "Trauma bays 1 through 3, ready right now. Get the blood bank on absolute emergency standby. Get respiratory therapy down to the trauma deck immediately. Jared, you are glued to Dr. Vance's side. Vance, you are strictly on lines and monitors. Support only, do you copy me?" Maya's eyes lifted. They did not widen in fear, and they did not flicker with a single hint of panic. Instead, they looked almost resigned, looking as if the day had finally decided to become exactly what it had been threatening to be all along. "Yes, ma'am," she said clearly. Dr. Vance turned sharply toward Trauma Room 1. "Let's move." He took exactly 3 rapid steps before his phone vibrated violently again. It was an incoming call from an unknown number. He frowned deeply and answered it. Vance. The voice on the other end of the line was incredibly strained, breathy, and full of deafening background noise. Doctor, this is Officer Toland with the State Police. I am currently out on the highway. If you have any trauma staff trying to commute into the hospital right now, tell them to turn back or stay put. The entire river bridge is completely locked up. We have a massive chain reaction pileup, and the entire interstate is completely shut down in both directions. EMS is aggressively trying to divert through local surface streets, but city traffic is an absolute disaster. Everyone is stuck. Dr. Vance's gaze snapped directly to the main entrance doors, as if he could see the gridlocked interstate from where he stood. My senior trauma fellow is out on that road. Then your fellow is not coming, the officer said bluntly. Nobody is getting through. Dr. Vance ended the call instantly and looked directly at Colleen. What is it? She demanded, seeing his face. The interstate is entirely locked down, Dr. Vance said, his voice flat. Any surgeon who is not already standing inside this building is not getting here today. Colleen's jaw tightened until the muscles flexed. So it is just you. Dr. Vance did not bother to answer. He was already moving into the bay. The very first siren arrived as a distant, echoing wail, then rapidly grew louder, then multiplied into a deafening chorus that completely filled the air outside the ambulance bay. The intense sound pressed hard against the concrete walls of the hospital, as if it were desperately trying to force its way inside. Maya stood right at the edge of Trauma Room 1 and pulled on her medical gloves. She tugged them incredibly tight, too tight, causing the thick blue rubber to snap loudly against her wrist. Jared jogged into the room right beside Dr. Vance, his face pale. 7 critical patients. 7 at the very least, Colleen said, stepping into the bay with her clipboard completely abandoned somewhere behind her. And that 5-minute ETA was incredibly generous. They are here. Dr. Vance glanced directly at Maya. Are you ready for this? Maya met his eyes with absolute focus. Yes, doctor. There was something incredibly chilling in the way she said the word, looking as if readiness was not an emotion, but an internal military switch that had just been flipped. The heavy double doors to the ambulance bay slammed open hard, and freezing, wet air rushed into the corridor along with the breathless paramedics. The very first stretcher hit the threshold, its small wheels rattling violently against the floor. The patient lying on it was completely pale, his eyes glassy and unfocused, with dark red blood soaking through the white sheet in a rapidly spreading bloom. The lead paramedic began loudly shouting out the vital signs over the immense noise of the room. Male, 32 years old, severe blunt force trauma, highly unstable. Breath sounds are severely diminished on the left side. Blood pressure is actively tanking. Possible massive internal hemorrhage. The physiological monitors immediately began to scream, as if they had been waiting all morning long to do so. More stretchers followed right behind the first, one after another, creating a long line of human disaster pouring directly into the hospital. Colleen's voice rose to a scream. Move, move, move. Dr. Vance stepped forward instantly. Maya stepped forward too, positioning herself right behind him, her hands already hovering precisely near the specialized kit drawer, looking as if she had completely memorized the exact layout in a place where a single second of hesitation got people killed. The first stretcher came through the doors so incredibly fast that the paramedic nearly clipped the metal doorframe. Cold rainwater dripped rapidly off the wheels, leaving a dark, muddy trail straight across the clean white tiles. The young patient's skin had that specific dull, gray tone that naturally made experienced medical professionals move significantly faster without even thinking about it. Male 32, the paramedic shouted again, completely breathless from the physical exertion. Blunt trauma, highly unstable. Diminished breath sounds on the left. Pressure is actively dropping. Massive internal bleed suspected. Dr. Garrett Vance stepped in directly at the head of the bed, his hands out, his eyes instantly taking a complete inventory of the physical damage. Jared slid quickly to the side with his digital tablet, frantically trying to turn the chaotic spoken words into an official medical order. Colleen's voice cracked through the room like a whip. Trauma Room 1. Everyone else hold the hallway. We handle one patient at a time unless I explicitly say otherwise. It was a nice academic idea, but the universe did not care. The massive ambulance bay doors stayed wide open anyway, looking as if the building itself had decided it would no longer get to choose its own reality. Maya Vance moved rapidly behind Dr. Vance and opened the specific kit drawer. Her fingers instantly found the heavy needle decompression set, without her even looking at the tray. She set it firmly on the counter and looked directly at the patient's exposed chest, noting the highly uneven rise and fall, and the frantic, desperate pull of his accessory neck muscles. The man's eyes were wide and completely unfocused, his mouth opening and closing in silent panic, looking exactly like a human being who was actively drowning on dry land. Dr. Vance leaned down close to the man's face. "Sir, stay with me. What is your name?" The young man tried desperately to speak, but failed completely. A thick, wet rattle came up from his throat instead. The monitor screamed a warning. His oxygen saturation was sliding down fast, and his heart rate was climbing dangerously high. The nurse stationed at the monitor began calling out the numbers out loud, but those numbers were already written across Dr. Vance's face. Jared said anxiously, "We need to get him upstairs to diagnostic imaging immediately." Dr. Vance did not answer him. He pressed his stethoscope firmly to the left side of the man's chest, then quickly moved it to the right. On the left side there was absolutely nothing, total silence. On the right, the breath sounds were entirely too loud and entirely too fast. Colleen looked directly at Dr. Vance. "We need Dr. Kincaid down here for a chest tube." Dr. Vance's jaw tightened. "Where is he?" Colleen did not waste a single second pretending. Still trying to fight his way through the bridge traffic. His very last text message stated that he is completely stuck and not moving an inch. Dr. Vance's eyes flicked rapidly to the open doors where another stretcher was already waiting in line. Another paramedic already raising their voice to shout out vitals. Maya watched the surgeon's gaze carefully, seeing the intense mental calculation, the brutal split between what he wanted to do and what the room could actually afford to give. She saw the exact way his hand hovered in the air. Not because he was unsure of what to do, but because he was being forced to decide which dying patient got his clinical attention first. The patient on the bed coughed violently again, and the wet rattle in his throat deepened into a choking, panicked sound. Maya set her palm lightly but firmly against the man's shaking shoulder. "Look directly at me," she said, her voice remaining perfectly steady and calm. "Breathe with me right now. And out, stay right here with me." She turned her head slightly to speak to Dr. Vance and Jared, keeping her voice low enough that only the two of them could hear her over the din. "He is actively trapping air in his chest cavity. His lung is collapsing. He is going to completely crash in less than 60 seconds. Jared's eyebrows drew together in anger. "You can't possibly be sure of that, nurse." Maya did not blink. "I am entirely sure." Dr. Vance looked at her, then looked back at the patient's laboring chest, then glanced at the crashing monitor. He made a definitive decision. It was not the slow, calculated kind of decision made in corporate conference rooms. "Needle decompression right now," Dr. Vance ordered. Jared hesitated for a fraction of a second, then reached clumsily for the sterile kit. Maya's hand immediately covered his for a brief moment, stopping his movement entirely. It was not a forceful gesture, but it was incredibly precise. "Second intercostal space mid-clavicular line," she said, her voice dropping into a rhythmic cadence. "If you go even a centimeter too low, you are going to hit major blood vessels. If you go too medial, you are going to miss the pleural space entirely. Feel for the anatomical angle right now." Jared stared at her in utter shock. "How do you know that exact technique?" Maya's eyes did not leave the patient's face. "Because it works." Dr. Vance nodded his head once. "Do it, Cole." Jared's fingers were shaking violently with adrenaline. Maya adjusted the angle of the large needle with just two of her fingertips. The heavy needle went straight in. There was an immediate, sharp hiss of escaping air, sounding exactly like a high-pressure car tire losing air. The patient's chest instantly expanded far more evenly. The oxygen percentage on the monitor immediately ticked upward, buying them precious minutes. The man's eyes stayed fixed entirely on Maya, still absolutely terrified but no longer actively drowning. "Good work," Dr. Vance said, and the praise sounded like it was meant for everyone in the room. Chest tube kit, ready right now. Colleen barked into the hallway. Blood on standby, we have significantly more coming through the doors. As if her spoken words had summoned them, the second stretcher rolled violently into the bay. Female mid-20s. The paramedic called out loudly. Severe abdominal trauma from a steering wheel impact. Suspected splenic injury. Her blood pressure is entirely unreadable on the machine. She keeps dropping lower and lower. Her face was heavily streaked with dark road grime and fine glass dust. Her lips were completely pale. Her eyes were half open and completely unfocused, looking as if she could not decide whether to stay in the living world or drift away. A nearby nurse tried to place a blood pressure cuff on her arm again, but the machine failed to read a pressure. Jared looked back and forth from one bed to the other, his eyes wide with panic. We need to prioritize who we treat first. Colleen's voice snapped like thunder. We are already prioritizing, doctor. Move your feet. Maya stepped directly to the second bed before anyone could assign her to it. Colleen's eyes narrowed instantly, but she did not make a single move to stop her because there was absolutely no physical space in the room for arguments that did not actively fix a problem. Maya pressed her fingers into the young woman's abdomen with immense gentleness, not to diagnose her with physical pain, but to feel exactly what the body could not say out loud. The underlying tissue was incredibly rigid and hard. The skin was freezing cool to the touch. The pulse at her wrist was a thin, flickering thread that threatened to disappear. The young woman tried to speak, a tiny whisper of sound escaping her lips, with dark blood visible in the corner of her mouth. Maya leaned down close to her ear. Hey, stay right here with me. What is your name? The woman's eyelids fluttered weakly. Dr. Vance was still completely occupied with the first patient's chest tube. Jared hovered between the two beds like a gate left wide open in the middle of a massive storm. Maya looked up directly at Colleen. I need blood right now. Oh, negative, fully warmed. Colleen's face tightened in shock. Who exactly told you to call for a massive transfusion protocol, Vance? Maya held her intense gaze without a single drop of fear. If we wait for a laboratory result, she dies right in front of us. The words landed incredibly hard in the room. Not dramatic, just perfectly factual. Colleen glanced at the monitor, noted the woman's fading skin tone, and looked at the way her body was already actively withdrawing from life. Blood bank. Colleen snapped fiercely into the wall phone. Activate the massive transfusion protocol right now. Jared's head snapped around toward Colleen. We legally need a licensed physician to authorize an order like that. Dr. Vance heard the argument and turned his head slightly without moving his hands from the first patient's chest cavity. I authorize the protocol completely. Move your feet, Cole. Jared's cheeks flushed bright red, and he obeyed instantly. The third stretcher hit the threshold of the trauma bay with a violent impact that made the metal side rails rattle loudly. He coded in the back of the rig. The paramedic shouted over the deafening noise. We got him back for a brief minute with chest compressions, then lost his pulse again right as we pulled up. The patient's chest was completely still. His head lolled heavily to one side. The physiological monitor attached to him was already showing a flat line. The entire room shifted instantly. Every single professional in the room recognized that specifics sound the exact way wild animals recognize distant thunder. Colleen pointed a finger fiercely. Trauma room 3. Code team, get in there right now. The fourth stretcher came rolling right behind it. Male 40 years old. The paramedic called out. Severe head trauma, severe chest trauma. Pupils are entirely unequal, and his breathing is incredibly shallow. Then came the fifth stretcher. Teenage male. Another paramedic yelled out over the din of the room. Severe crush injury to the pelvis. Pelvis is highly unstable. Blood pressure is actively dropping. He is freezing cold. The hallway directly outside the bay became an absolute logjam of gurneys, medical equipment, and terrified people in absolute agony. Family members were not even inside the building yet, but they would be soon. The heavy grief was already moving toward the building, just traveling slightly slower than the speeding ambulances. Dr. Vance stepped back from the first patient long enough to scan the massive incoming flood of trauma. His eyes locked onto Colleen. Shut the main doors, Dr. Vance said, his voice dropping low. Colleen's voice was incredibly tight. We can't legally shut the doors, Garrett. We have 7 critical patients. Then we do not move a single human being out of this trauma bay, unless they are stable enough to survive the hallway, Dr. Vance said firmly. Keep them all right here. Make the hallway come to us. Colleen nodded her head once, fully understanding the exact language of battlefield triage he was speaking. She turned around and started issuing rapid-fire orders like she was laying out defensive military positions. If you are completely hooked on this medical mystery, hit that share button, tell your friends about this channel, and make sure you are subscribed because we are only halfway through the dark secrets of this hospital floor. Maya Vance was already standing inside Trauma Room 3, her hands moving rapidly before her brain had even finished naming what her eyes had seen. She placed the heavy defibrillator pads onto the coded patient's chest with the absolute speed of someone who had performed the exact task in places where there were no walls or clean floors. Charge the machine, she said firmly. A nearby nurse stared at her in shock. He has been down for too long. Charge the machine, Maya repeated, her voice firm enough to cut straight through any human hesitation. The defibrillator began to beep loudly as it charged up. The digital number climbed higher and higher. The entire room went completely still in the exact way it always did before electricity made a choice. Clear, Maya said loudly. She scanned the entire room once, making sure absolutely no hands were touching the bed, her eyes darting back to the monitor. Then she pressed the button. The patient's body jumped violently off the mattress. The monitor stayed completely flat for a long beat that felt like a direct accusation of failure. Maya did not look disappointed, and she did not look hopeful. She looked entirely focused. Again, she said. Someone immediately started rhythmic chest compressions. Someone else bagged air into lungs that were completely refusing to cooperate. Someone called out the time. Maya watched the cardiac rhythm, watched the chest rise, watched the skin color. Her mind was already running down various medical options, not as a memorized list from a textbook, but as a clear path through dangerous terrain. Epinephrine, she said. A nurse fumbled nervously for the syringe. Maya's steady hand reached out and steadied the nurse's shaking wrist without a single shred of judgment. Now. The medication went straight into the line. Clear, Maya said again. The high-voltage shock hit the chest. The monitor flickered wildly. A small, organized beat suddenly appeared on the screen, thin as a promise. Then another followed right behind it. A nurse exhaled a massive breath like she had been holding it for minutes. Someone whispered quietly, Jesus. Maya did not react to the word at all. She watched the pulse steadily strengthen. Watched the healthy color slowly creep back into the patient's pale face like a dawn. Keep up the chest compressions if his rate drops even a fraction, she ordered. Do not let him drift away. Colleen stepped quickly into Trauma Room 3, her eyes sharp as needles. Who exactly put you in charge of a code blue, Vance? Maya looked up at her. Nobody. Colleen's mouth tightened. The formal accusation was clearly there, but it had absolutely nowhere to land because the patient was actively breathing. Stay on the monitors, Colleen said, her voice clipped. Support role only. Maya nodded. Yes, ma'am. She turned around and moved directly toward Trauma Room 2 again, where the young woman with severe abdominal trauma was receiving warmed blood now. A dark red line flowing into her vein like borrowed time. The electric blood warmer hummed loudly. The pressure bag stayed inflated. A nurse called out the vital numbers, and for the very first time all morning, the numbers were something other than falling. Jared stood right near the head of the bed, his eyes incredibly wide, trying his absolute best to look like he belonged in this immense volume of chaos. Her blood pressure is coming back up, he said, absolute relief breaking through his voice. Maya did not let him have that relief yet. She watched the woman's breathing patterns, the intense tension in her neck muscles, and the way her eyes rolled back into her head. Her airway is going to completely close, Maya said quietly. Jared frowned deeply. She is actively breathing on her own. Not well, Maya replied flatly. Her entire body is actively shutting down from shock. Jared opened his mouth to argue, then closed it instantly when the young woman's chest hitched violently and her chin dropped forward. Tilt her head back, Maya commanded. Perform a jaw thrust right now. Jared did it awkwardly, looking entirely unsure of himself. Maya reached out for the suction catheter, rapidly clearing the dark blood that threatened to completely obstruct the throat. Call respiratory therapy back. A nurse grabbed the wall phone instantly. Respiratory to trauma room 2 right now. Maya's hands stayed perfectly steady, but her eyes were moving constantly, tracking every single event in the room. She saw Dr. Vance across the bay with the first patient, with a chest tube being meticulously placed by Jared under the surgeon's direct supervision. She saw Colleen managing the crowded hallway like a military battlefield commander, placing people exactly where they mattered most. She also saw the massive gap. There were entirely too many critical patients for the small number of hands available. Too much bleeding for the tiny amount of time. Too much clinical decision-making for the amount of official authority present in the room. Dr. Kincaid is still completely out. Colleen called out loudly, looking as if she had read the exact thought straight off Dr. Vance's face. The surgeon did not answer her. He was actively suturing, clamping, and directing care. He looked exactly like a man trying to hold back a massive mudslide with nothing more than his bare hands. The sixth stretcher rolled into the bay, pushed hard by a paramedic whose face was heavily streaked with rainwater and sweat. "This one is incredibly bad," the paramedic shouted. "Severe chest trauma plus a massive head injury. He keeps desaturating on us. We were originally going to take him straight upstairs to CT imaging, but he refuses to stay stable for transport." Jared stepped rapidly toward the gurney. "CT first. We legally need to see exactly what is happening inside his skull." Maya shook her head once, a small, definitive movement. Jared looked at her, his anger flaring. "What is it now, Vance? If we move him into that elevator, we lose him entirely," Maya said. "That is completely against institutional protocol." Jared snapped, intense stress sharpening his voice to an edge. "You are a residency nurse. You are absolutely not making that clinical call." Maya met his eyes for the very first time with something significantly harder than calm. Not anger, not ego, but absolute, terrifying clarity. "The institutional protocol does not hold his airway open, doctor," she said. "Either we stabilize his breathing right here on this floor, or we carry him to a machine and watch him die in a hallway." Jared's jaw tightened until it looked like it would crack. "You don't know that for a fact." Maya placed her fingers firmly on the patient's neck, feeling the pulse, faint, uneven, and thready. She leaned down incredibly close, watching the pupils of his eyes, watching the rise of his chest. The patient's breath sounded entirely wet, a strained, agonizing sound like each inhale was scraping against massive internal damage. "I know it for a fact," she said. Dr. Vance heard the intense exchange and looked up from his work. His sharp eyes moved rapidly from the dying patient to Maya, then to Jared, seeing the moment for exactly what it was, a critical choice made in a matter of seconds. "We stabilize him right here," Dr. Vance ordered. Jared looked both relieved and deeply resentful at the exact same time. He moved to obey. Maya did not smile, and she did not gloat. She turned immediately to the respiratory therapist who had finally arrived in the room, their eyes wide as they took in the chaotic scene. "Bag him," Maya said. "Slow, controlled ventilations. Do not overventilate him under any circumstances. His lungs are incredibly fragile." The therapist blinked in confusion. "Who exactly are you?" Maya glanced down at her identification badge. "I'm Maya. Help him breathe." The therapist did not argue. There was absolutely no time for identity crises. At exactly 9:16 a.m., the main trauma bay looked significantly less like a modern hospital, and far more like a forward triage tent built under fluorescent lights. The white tile floor was slick in multiple places where human blood had found its way past the sheets. The air in the room was incredibly warm from the sheer number of bodies and humming machines. The sound was constant, a layered, deafening chorus of screaming monitors, wall suction, shouting voices, and the heavy, rhythmic thumping of chest compressions in Trauma Room 3 whenever that patient threatened to drop their rate again. Colleen's voice carried over the din. "We need another nurse in Trauma Room 1. Vance, stay off that bed." Maya heard the words clearly and did not move toward Trauma Room 1. Instead, she moved directly toward the central supply cart, stocking items, anticipating needs, and ensuring the critical tools were positioned exactly where they needed to be before a physician even realized they needed them. Jared approached her, his immense frustration simmering right under his professional mask. "You keep stepping in over the line, Vance." Maya kept her eyes fixed firmly on the supply cart. "People keep dying, doctor." "That is clearly not what I meant," Jared said, dropping his voice down low. "You correct my hand positioning like you have been performing field surgery for a decade. You call out clinical complications before the monitor even registers them. New nurses don't do that. It's impossible." Maya slid a sharp scalpel into its precise place on the tray. "Then don't look at me, Dr. Cole. Look at your patient." Jared's voice cracked under the weight of the stress. "I am looking at the patient." "Then act like it," Maya said, and the delivery was not cruel. It was perfectly direct, the exact kind of correction given to someone who could still become highly competent if they simply let go of their pride. Jared stared at her in utter silence, then turned around and ran back into Trauma Room 1. In Trauma Room 1, Dr. Vance was actively placing a chest tube, his hands remaining perfectly steady despite the deafening noise. The young patient who had been drowning earlier was now breathing with mechanical assistance, his eyes significantly less wild, and his chest expanding far more evenly. Dr. Vance glanced up as Jared approached the bedside. "Status report, Cole?" Jared spoke quickly. "The needle decompression worked perfectly. The tube is in place, oxygen saturation is steadily improving, but we have entirely too many critical patients. We desperately need another attending surgeon down here." Dr. Vance's mouth tightened. "We have exactly what we have." Colleen stepped into the bay, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. "The blood bank is sending down more units. Respiratory therapy is completely stretched to their limit. CT imaging is backing up fast. We are keeping all patients in the bay for now." Dr. Vance nodded once. "Good." Colleen lowered her voice to a whisper. "Nurse Vance is running clinical calls like she is the charge nurse of this department." Dr. Vance looked across the busy bay at Maya. She was calmly adjusting an intravenous line with a serenity that did not match the horrific scene. Then turning smoothly to speak to a terrified family member, who had somehow made it past security, placing a reassuring hand on their shoulder, guiding them back to the waiting area without making a single false promise. "She is keeping people alive, Colleen," Dr. Vance said flatly. Colleen's eyes narrowed into slits. "She is also making advanced clinical decisions that can easily get this hospital sued into the ground." Dr. Vance's gaze stayed fixed on Maya. "So can a body bag, Colleen?" The charge nurse did not like the answer, but she did not have a better one to offer. At exactly 9:19 a.m., the coded patient in Trauma Room 3 dropped his rate again. The monitor flattened into a solid tone. The entire room tensed up instantly. Maya was already standing at the bedside, her gloved hands firmly on the defibrillator paddles, her voice perfectly steady. "Clear." The high-voltage shock hit the chest. Absolute silence. "Compressions," she ordered. "Keep the rhythm perfect. Don't get sloppy with the depth." A young nurse started compressions, sweat forming rapidly on her brow. Jared's voice shouted from across the bay. "We should call the time of death." "How long has he been down?" Maya did not look up from the chest. "We call the time when the human body is completely done, not when we get tired of fighting." The words cut straight through. They were not sentimental in the slightest. They were brutal. Dr. Vance moved rapidly toward Trauma Room 3, then stopped completely when another nurse screamed for him from Trauma Room 1. A massive bleed. A surgical clamp was slipping off a major vessel. He was being pulled in two completely opposite directions at the exact same time. Maya saw the conflict and made a definitive choice. She did not bother to ask for permission. "Dr. Vance," she called out, her voice loud enough to reach him without sounding panicked. The surgeon turned his head. "I have the code," Maya said firmly. "Stay on your bleed." Dr. Vance hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded his head. That single nod changed something fundamental in the room. It was not an official administrative authority, but it was the absolute acknowledgement that in a mass casualty crisis, pure competence outranked bureaucratic titles every single time. Maya turned right back to the coded patient. "Epinephrine right now." The medication went into the line. Clear. Shaw. The monitor flickered wildly. A beat returned to the screen again, stubborn as before. A nurse exhaled a massive breath. He's back. Maya watched the cardiac rhythm stabilize. Keep him warm, she ordered. Warm fluids, warm blankets. Do not let his temperature drop again. At exactly 9:24 a.m., the first 3 patients were actively alive who by all medical laws should have been dead. At 9:28 a.m., the teenager with the severe pelvic crush injury started to spiral down fast. He was only 17 years old. His skin was completely mottled and cold. His hands trembled violently. He kept desperately trying to sit up in the bed, even though his pelvis was completely unstable. The human body's primitive reflex to flee danger, actively fighting against the body's medical reality. I can't breathe, he gasped out. You can breathe, Maya said, stepping incredibly close to his face. Look directly into my eyes. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Stay with me. The boy's eyes darted wildly to her face. Am I going to die today? Maya did not lie to him, and she did not soften the brutal truth into something useless. Instead, she made the truth survivable. Not if you stay right here with me, she said. Stay focused. Keep your eyes wide open. She pressed 2 fingers firmly to his wrist, then moved her hand to his abdomen, feeling for physical rigidity and internal distension. She watched his fading skin color, noting the way cold sweat beaded across his forehead despite the chilled room. His blood pressure dropped again. Jared approached the bed, his voice tight. Pelvic binder. Get him upstairs to CT immediately. Maya's hand tightened firmly on the teenager's wrist. He is actively bleeding out from a ruptured vessel, doctor. CT is not going to stop the internal hemorrhage. Jared's immense frustration flared up. You don't know exactly where the internal bleed is located. Maya looked down at the teenager's legs, noting the subtle external rotation of the feet, the deep bruising, and the clear instability of the bone. She looked at the blood pressure, the pulse and the skin. Pelvis, she said flatly. It is entirely the pelvis. He needs a pelvic binder and blood right now. Jared opened his mouth to argue fiercely. Colleen appeared suddenly at his shoulder. Binder, Colleen ordered. Do it right now, Cole. Jared snapped the pelvic binder into place with shaking hands. Maya guided his physical placement again, using 2 fingers to indicate exactly where the device needed to sit. Higher. Tighter than that. You are trying to manually squeeze the pelvic ring back together. Jared looked up at her, looking incredibly angry and deeply grateful at the exact same time. How do you know all of this? Maya's eyes stayed fixed on the teenager. Because I have watched people bleed to death from this exact injury until they stopped moving. Jared flinched violently at the sheer bluntness of her words. The teenager's eyes rolled back. His breathing hitched. Maya leaned down close. Stay with me. Tell me your name right now. Marcus, he whispered weakly. Marcus, listen to me very carefully, Maya said, her voice slow and grounding. You are absolutely not alone in this room. Do you understand me? The boy nodded weakly. Good, she said. Hold on. The warmed blood arrived. The dark red line began to flow. Marcus's blood pressure slowly crept upward. Maya did not celebrate the victory. She shifted instantly to the next immediate threat. The middle-aged man with head and chest trauma was deteriorating rapidly. His oxygen levels were unstable. His pupils remained entirely unequal. His body was actively fighting against the mechanical ventilations. The respiratory therapist looked at Jared. We legally need to intubate him right now. Jared nodded quickly. Prep the paralytics. Maya stepped in. Slow down, she said. He is absolutely not stable enough for a rushed intubation sequence. Jared snapped. You are not an anesthesia provider, Vance. Maya met his eyes. Then don't rush the drugs. If you push them too fast, his pressure drops to 0. Dr. Vance was across the bay, his hands deep inside a different crisis. He could not be everywhere at once. Colleen's voice cut in. Vance support role. Stop directing licensed physicians. Maya did not even bother to turn around to face her. If you want this man to live, don't push the induction drugs too fast. His cerebral perfusion pressure is hanging by a thread. The respiratory therapist hesitated for a moment, then adjusted the pump. Okay. Jared's face tightened until it was purple. You are actively undermining my clinical authority. Maya kept her voice perfectly level. I'm keeping him alive. The breathing tube went in cleanly on the second attempt, fully controlled. The oxygen levels stabilized on the monitor. Jared exhaled a massive breath. His eyes flicked to Maya again, not with the earlier irritation, but with something closer to total confusion. He did not know exactly where to place her in his world. He did not know if she was a dangerous threat to his career or an absolute lifeline. At exactly 9:31 a.m., 5 of the critical patients were stable enough to move. They were not safe, and they were certainly not healed, but they were simply no longer actively slipping through their fingers. Colleen called down for medical transport, but the hospital hallways were completely clogged with equipment. CT imaging was backed up. The intensive care unit was frantically scrambling to clear beds. The entire hospital was a body trying its best to absorb a massive wound. Keep them all right here, Dr. Vance ordered again. We move them only when we can guarantee care. Maya watched the physical flow of the department, noting the bottlenecks and the way the entire system was straining under the weight. She could feel the outer edges of total systemic failure, not as a thought in her head, but as a physical sensation in her spine. In the ambulance bay outside, the sirens continued to wail. They were not for new patients now, but for city traffic that could not move an inch. Police radios crackled loudly. The outside world was entirely loud and chaotic, while inside, the trauma bay had become its own isolated universe with its own set of rules. At exactly 9:35 a.m., a nurse shouted out, "We are completely low on pressure bags." Maya was already moving before the sentence finished. She disappeared into the supply room and returned in seconds with 3, then 5 bags, stacking them on the counter like live ammunition. Colleen saw her action, hesitated for a moment, then said, "Thank you," looking as if the spoken word cost her something immense. Maya nodded once. At exactly 9:40 a.m., the 6th patient, the one who should have gone to imaging earlier, began to violently seize in the bed. His entire body tightened up, his jaw clenched shut, and his eyes rolled completely back into his head. Jared swore loudly. "We need neurosurgery down here. We need an immediate CT scan." Maya grabbed a pre-loaded syringe from the cart. "Benzodiazepine right now." Jared stared at her in shock. "We don't have a signed physician order for that." Maya's eyes snapped directly to his face. "Do you want to wait for electronic paperwork while his brain literally cooks from hyperthermia?" Jared's jaw worked. He looked desperately toward Dr. Vance. The surgeon was still in trauma room 1, still managing a massive internal bleed, still holding the line. Maya did not wait for Jared to make up his mind. She turned around and shouted to Colleen, "Call Dr. Vance right now. Tell him we need seizure medications authorized verbally." Colleen lifted the wall phone instantly, her voice clipped. "Doctor, Vance says the patient is seizing. She wants a benzo pushed immediately." Dr. Vance's voice came through the speaker sharp and clear. "Dose it and push it now." Colleen relayed the order. Maya administered the medication into the line. The violent seizure immediately eased up. The patient's breathing smoothed out. Jared looked at her like she had just performed absolute magic. Maya looked at the patient like she had just solved a simple math problem. At exactly 9:46 a.m., a technician from CT imaging finally pushed his way into the busy bay. "We can take exactly 1 patient right now." Colleen pointed a finger without a single second of hesitation. "The head trauma in bed 4. Move now." Jared moved to push the heavy gurney. Maya immediately stepped directly in front of it, blocking his path. Jared's eyes flared with anger. "Move out of the way, Vance." Maya's voice stayed perfectly calm. "If you jostle him or rush him over the door thresholds, his intracranial pressure is going to spike and he will herniate. We go incredibly slow. We keep his blood pressure perfectly stable. We bag his respirations the entire way down the hall. We do not stop in the corridor to answer a single question from anyone." Jared's lips pressed together into a thin line. "You are absolutely not in charge of this transport." Maya held his intense gaze. Then be in charge, doctor. Act like it. Jared swallowed hard, looking down. Okay. We move slow. They rolled the patient out of the bay. Maya walking precisely at the head of the bed, her eyes scanning the hallway ahead, clearing the crowded corridor with her mere presence far more than her words. A terrified family member tried to step forward into their path. Is that my husband? Maya turned her head just enough to make eye contact. He is alive, she said, her voice full of grounding certainty. Stay right here. Someone will update you in a few minutes. The family member froze in place, completely comforted by the absolute lack of hesitation in her voice. Back inside the bay, Dr. Vance called out for a status report. Colleen answered instantly. 3 patients are pending ICU transfer. 1 is cleared for the operating room if we can get an open slot. CT just took the head trauma. Dr. Vance's jaw tightened. And Kincaid? Colleen's eyes hardened. Still completely stuck on the highway. The surgeon's shoulders rose and fell once in a heavy sigh. He turned right back to his patient. At exactly 9:52 a.m. The young woman with the severe abdominal trauma began to drop her numbers again. Her blood pressure fell rapidly. Her skin went ice cold. The warmed blood running into her vein no longer seemed to be enough to keep up with the internal loss. Jared returned from the hallway, his eyes wide with fear. She needs immediate emergency surgery. Dr. Vance looked up from his bed, and his entire expression changed. She needs the operating room right now. Colleen's phone was already pressed tightly to her ear. The operating rooms are completely full. They currently have a ruptured aortic aneurysm in progress. Dr. Vance's voice went completely flat and cold. Then tell them to make space. Colleen's eyes flashed in frustration. We can't legally kick an active aneurysm out of a room, Garrett. Then tell them to open a second room immediately, Dr. Vance ordered. Colleen shook her head once. We don't have the surgical staffing down there. Not with the interstate locked down. Dr. Vance's fingers curled tightly into a fist, then released. He looked directly at Maya, who had just returned from the hallway and was already at the bedside, rapidly assessing the young woman again. Maya pressed gently on the abdomen. It was significantly more rigid than before. She is losing the internal fight, Maya said quietly. Jared's voice rose to a panicked scream. We have to do something right now. Maya looked directly at Jared. We are doing something, doctor. We are actively buying her minutes. Jared's hands lifted in total frustration. Minutes for what? Maya's eyes did not soften in the slightest. Minutes for the hospital system to catch up with the reality of the room. Minutes for an operating room to open up. Minutes for her not to die before that double door opens. Dr. Vance stepped closer to the bed. Prep the room for emergency bedside stabilization. We are going to clamp what we can right here. We keep her alive until the door opens. Colleen stared at him in utter horror. Doctor, that is completely against standard civilian protocol. Dr. Vance's voice dropped low. Neither is having 7 critical trauma patients drop on your floor at the exact same time. Colleen's eyes flicked rapidly to Maya, then back to Dr. Vance. Fine. But it is your legal name going on the chart. It's my name, Dr. Vance said without a shred of hesitation. Maya's mouth tightened, and for the very first time all morning, something resembling deep respect flickered in her eyes. They worked with immense speed, fast, clean, and completely controlled. The massive trauma bay seemed to shrink down entirely into the young woman's broken body, and the bleeding problem hidden deep inside it. Hands moved with fluidity, sterile instruments were passed back and forth, blood was continuously suctioned away, and pressure was manually maintained. Maya's clinical role stayed strictly within the legal line, while simultaneously standing directly on the edge of it. She held heavy retractors steady, managed the high-volume suction lines, and continuously called out the vital numbers. She did not reach for the scalpel herself, but she watched Dr. Vance's hands with such intense focus it looked like she could see the exact next surgical step before he even made it. Jared watched the procedure too, his face completely pale, learning things that medical textbooks could never hope to teach. At exactly 10:01 a.m., the very last stretcher arrived, the 7th patient. The paramedics moved significantly slower with this one. Not because they had plenty of time, but because the sheer severity of the physical injuries demanded absolute respect. The patient's face was heavily bruised, one eye was swollen completely shut, and his jaw was locked tight in immense pain even through the thick haze of medical shock. His chest was tightly wrapped in field dressings. His airway sounded severely compromised, a wet, ragged, agonizing pull for air. "This one is incredibly bad," the lead paramedic said, his voice hoarse from the run. "Multiple orthopedic fractures, massive internal bleeding. Airway is highly compromised. He lost consciousness twice en route to the hospital." The entire room felt the immense weight of the arrival. Even Dr. Vance paused, his hands for a fraction of a second, his eyes rapidly scanning the man's broken body, mentally measuring what could be fixed and what might be entirely past saving. Maya did not pause for a single second. She stepped directly to the side of the bed and assessed the body once, then assessed it twice with rapid speed.
Airway, breathing, circulation.
She placed her fingers firmly to the neck, feeling a pulse that was present but visibly weakening by the second. She watched the uneven rise of the chest. She glanced at the rigid abdomen, noting the deep bruising and extreme tension of the skin. She reached down and touched the hands. They were freezing cold. Someone muttered quietly near the back of the room, their voice full of half-disbelief. "She's not even looking at his medical chart." Maya heard the comment clearly. She did not bother to turn her head. "Because the medical chart is sitting behind the physical injury," she said evenly. "Focus your eyes." Jared stared at her. "We need immediate portable imaging." Maya shook her head. "We need air right now. Air trumps imaging." The respiratory therapist stepped forward with the advanced intubation kit. "We can tube him right now." Maya watched the patient's laboring chest, listening intensely to the sound of his breathing. If you sedate him hard with standard drugs, his vascular tone drops to 0 and he will code. "We go controlled." Jared snapped fiercely. "You keep saying the word controlled like you are the one running this entire trauma deck, Vance." Maya's eyes lifted to his face, calm, sharp, and cold as ice. "Then run it yourself, doctor. Give clear, definitive orders. Stop arguing with me in front of a dying patient, and start saving his life." Jared's mouth opened wide, then closed instantly. He looked desperately at Dr. Vance. The veteran surgeon's gaze moved back and forth between the two of them. He saw what everyone else in the room saw now. The resident was completely drowning in the chaos. The trauma bay was entirely full. Dr. Kincaid was nowhere near the building, and the last patient was actively tipping over the edge into death. Dr. Vance made a definitive choice again. "Vance, call the medication sequence. Price, you execute the procedure." Jared stiffened up completely. "Doctor." Dr. Vance's voice was firm as concrete. "Do it now, Cole." Maya nodded her head once, looking as if she had just been given permission to breathe. She spoke, and the entire room moved in unison. "2 large bore lines," Maya ordered, her voice cutting through the noise. "Get the blood warmers running. Keep the pressure bag ready. Open the advanced airway kit. Turn the wall suction on. Prepare low-dose ketamine for induction if needed. A slow, controlled push. We must preserve his blood pressure at all costs." The respiratory therapist obeyed instantly. Jared's hands moved to the tray, still incredibly tense, but guided now by something significantly steadier than his own raw fear. The breathing tube went straight into the trachea on the very first try. The suction line rapidly cleared the airway. The chest began to rise far more evenly. The oxygen saturation numbers on the monitor climbed higher and higher. Maya watched the digital numbers intensely. Not just the absolute value on the screen, but the overall trend, the exact direction of the movement. "Blood," she said simply. It began to flow into the line. The blood pressure crept upward. The pulse strengthened. A nurse whispered quietly to herself in near disbelief, 7. Colleen heard the whisper and looked up at the row of monitors. 7 green lines were glowing brightly across the screens, places where by all medical laws there should have been at least one flat line. 7 privacy curtains were hiding 7 human bodies that were still actively breathing inside them. The entire trauma bay went noticeably quieter in the exact way a room did after the worst wave of a disaster finally passed over. It was not totally silent, but it was significantly less chaotic. The overall energy in the air shifted from frantic panic to deep vigilance. The medical staff did not relax. They simply stopped sprinting for half a second to catch their breath. Dr. Vance stepped back from the bedside, his gloves heavily stained, his eyes looking incredibly heavy with physical exhaustion. He looked across the room at Maya, who stood quietly near the stainless steel counter. Her shoulders were perfectly squared, and her sleeves were heavily marked with human blood that was absolutely not her own. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a brand new residency nurse dressed in blue scrubs. Except absolutely nothing about her performance in the last hour matched that entry-level label. Dr. Vance opened his mouth, as if he were finally going to say her name out loud the exact way you say a person's name when you fully understand the magnitude of what they have just accomplished. The heavy automatic doors at the far end of the long hall suddenly slid open again. They did not open for new incoming stretchers, and they did not open for panicked family members. Two tall men walked smoothly into the department, wearing dark, formal suits that looked entirely out of place in an emergency room. They moved with absolute purpose, but without a single shred of urgency, their eyes rapidly scanning the entire layout of the room like they were reading a private tactical map that only they could see. The standard sounds of the trauma bay did not stop all at once. Rather, they bled away one voice at a time, until even the screaming monitors seemed to grow quieter under the tension. The two men came to a halt right at the central nurses' station. Leather wallets were smoothly flipped open. Official metal badges flashed brightly in the light. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The taller agent spoke first, his voice perfectly calm, sounding as if he were simply ordering a cup of coffee. "We are officially looking for Maya Vance." Every single head in the room turned instantly to look at her. Maya slowly lifted her eyes. For the very first time since the very first stretcher had hit the threshold that morning, her busy hands went completely still. The taller agent did not bother to raise his voice. He did not need to. The mere letters FBI carried their own massive gravity, instantly pulling every single eye in the trauma bay toward one single point. Colleen Hayes moved first, her shoulders squared aggressively, her clipboard still held tightly in her hand like a physical weapon. "This is a level 1 trauma hospital," she said, her voice dripping with anger. "You can't just walk onto my floor whenever you want and start demanding to see my clinical staff." The agent's eyes did not waver from Maya's face. "We are absolutely not here for the hospital, ma'am." Dr. Garrett Vance stepped forward instantly, fresh blood visible on his gloves, his sharp gaze looking intense enough to cut. "If you are here regarding a legal matter with a patient, you can wait until they are out of immediate danger." "This matter cannot wait," the taller agent replied, his voice as steady as a metronome. He opened his leather wallet again, moving significantly slower this time, looking as if he were showing the entire room that this was absolutely not a misunderstanding. "Special Agent Nolan Briggs. This is Special Agent Renee Alvarez. We legally need to speak with Maya Vance immediately." Colleen's disbelief turned into pure, unadulterated anger. "She just single-handedly kept 7 people alive while you two were wherever it is you were." Agent Briggs nodded his head once, looking as if he had already thoroughly read the report before arriving. "I know exactly what she did." Maya's pulse remained perfectly steady. Her hands, heavily stained at the wrist cuffs, rested flat on the counter. She looked back at the federal agents the exact way she had looked at every crashing monitor that morning. No panic, no drama, just absolute clinical assessment. She stepped forward smoothly before anyone in the room could attempt to shield her. "I am Maya Vance," she said, her voice clear. "What is this about?" Agent Alvarez lifted a black digital tablet in her left hand. The bright screen glowed faintly against the harsh, buzzing lights of the emergency room. "We need a private room immediately." Dr. Vance's jaw tightened until the muscles flexed. "She is absolutely not going anywhere with you." Agent Briggs did not flinch or back down. "She is not under arrest, Doctor." Dr. Vance held his intense gaze. "Then speak to her right here on the floor." Agent Briggs's voice stayed perfectly even. "We legally need to talk where we can be clearly heard, and where we can formally document every single word we say. This will take exactly 10 minutes of her time." Colleen leaned in close to Maya, dropping her voice to a low whisper. "Don't go into a closed room alone with them, Maya." Maya looked at her, And for a brief moment, something in her cold facial expression softened just a fraction. It was not a look of gratitude, and it was certainly not fear. It was pure recognition. She nodded her head once. "I'll go," Maya said clearly. Dr. Vance stepped closer instantly. "I am coming with you." Agent Briggs raised a hand firmly. "Doctor, you can wait directly outside the door." Dr. Vance's eyes narrowed into slits. "I am absolutely not waiting outside in a hallway while you interrogate my staff." Agent Alvarez finally looked up from her digital tablet. Her sharp gaze flicked down to Dr. Vance's stained gloves, noted the fresh blood, and saw the immense, exhausted strain visible around his eyes. "This is not about your hospital staff, doctor," she said, her voice dropping. "This is entirely about her." Maya did not bother to argue, and she did not ask for permission from anyone. She walked smoothly past the nurse's station, past the metal curtain rails, past 7 stabilized human lives, and followed the 2 federal agents straight down the long corridor. As she moved away, the trauma bay behind her tried its absolute best to start breathing normally again. Monitors beeped. A nurse spoke entirely too loudly, and then lowered her voice instantly, and someone whispered her name like it was suddenly an incredibly dangerous word to say out loud. Dr. Vance followed them down the hall anyway, stopping only when Colleen reached out and firmly grabbed his sleeve. "Garrett," the charge nurse said under her breath, her eyes wide. "If you throw your medical authority at the FBI right now, you are going to make this situation significantly worse." Dr. Vance's eyes stayed fixed entirely on Maya's retreating back. "Worse than what, Colleen?" The charge nurse did not offer an answer because she truly did not know. The small consultation room located near the main administration wing had a polished wooden table, 3 standard chairs, and the specific kind of soft, recessed lighting that tried its absolute best to make incredibly hard conversations feel reasonable. The heavy door shut tight behind them with a quiet, solid click that made Maya's skin prickle. The sound was entirely too gentle for the gravity of what it actually meant. Agent Briggs sat down across from her without asking for permission. Agent Alvarez remained standing near the wall, tablet in hand, her sharp eyes scanning the room once before settling firmly on Maya, looking exactly like a weapon locking onto a target. Agent Briggs folded his hands neatly on the table. "For the official record, this conversation is entirely voluntary." Maya sat down smoothly, her physical posture perfectly straight, her shoulders completely relaxed in a way that did not match the intense circumstances of the room. "Then tell me exactly why the FBI is standing in my hospital because a residency nurse did the job she was hired to do." Agent Alvarez's mouth tightened into a thin line. "You didn't do your job today, Ms. Vance. You did someone else's entirely." Maya's gaze held steady. People were actively dying on the floor. Agent Briggs leaned back slightly in his chair, studying every single line of her face like he was looking for a crack in stone. "We are fully aware of that. We read the exact same electronic trauma log that your hospital administration did. The only difference is that your specific name triggered a high-level federal alert the exact microsecond it was entered into the system." Maya did not blink. "What kind of alert?" Agent Alvarez tapped the screen of the tablet and turned it around so Maya could see the display clearly. The bright screen showed exact timestamps, specific medical procedures, and detailed clinical notes. A list that looked perfectly clinical until you understood it as absolute federal evidence. Agent Alvarez's voice was clipped and professional. At exactly 9:12 a.m., an advanced needle decompression was performed. At 9:14 a.m., a massive transfusion protocol was activated without physician orders. At 9:19 a.m., a cardiac resuscitation with manual defibrillation was executed. At 9:28 a.m., a complex pelvic stabilization was performed. At 9:35 a.m., an advanced airway management strategy was used that is completely inconsistent with standard civilian nursing training. At 9:40 a.m., emergency seizure management was conducted. At 10:01 a.m., an advanced intubation sequence with hemodynamic preservation was called out. She looked up from the screen, her eyes cold. "That is absolutely not a rookie residency nurse's morning shift, Ms. Vance." Maya's eyes moved slowly across the digital list and stopped. Those clinical decisions kept 7 human beings alive today. If you want to know what the government is desperately trying to hide in this room, smash that like button, leave a comment with your theories, and share this video right now because the truth is about to come out. Agent Briggs's voice stayed perfectly calm. They also happened to match the exact tactical training taught to a very specific, highly classified kind of military medic. Maya said absolutely nothing. Agent Alvarez zoomed in closer on one of the specific digital entries. You used field triage prioritization protocols. You explicitly refused diagnostic imaging when standard institutional protocol indicated an immediate CT scan. You directed medical staff under intense fire, metaphorically speaking, and you did it without a single second of hesitation. That is absolutely not a new nurse being brave. Maya's jaw set hard. Bravery is a word civilian people use when they don't actually understand what is required to survive. Agent Briggs's eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. That is an incredibly interesting way to put it. Agent Alvarez stepped closer to the table, her shadow falling over the wood. We ran your state nursing license. On paper, it is completely valid. We ran your employment history. It checks out perfectly. We ran your educational background. It exists. You have done absolutely everything you are supposed to do on paper to build a normal life. She tapped the screen again. Except for the fact that there is a massive gap. Maya's gaze did not shift an inch. People have gaps in their lives. Not like this one, they don't, Agent Alvarez said sharply. She swiped her finger across the screen, and a timeline appeared with a massive, blank stretch of years that looked exactly like missing teeth. 5 years total. Absolutely no school records, no employment history, no address history, no taxes filed, no credit card activity, no medical visits, and absolutely zero digital footprint that aligns with the rest of your life. Agent Briggs leaned forward over the table again. 5 years of your life that simply do not exist in the modern world. Maya's breathing stayed perfectly level. Maybe I didn't want them to exist. Agent Alvarez's eyes narrowed into slits. That is absolutely not how federal databases work, Ms. Vance. Maya's voice stayed perfectly even. And that is exactly why you two are standing in this room today. A heavy silence settled over the small room. Not empty silence, but something incredibly loaded with tension. The low hum of the ceiling ventilation vent suddenly sounded significantly louder than it should have. Agent Briggs watched Maya's hands resting on the wooden table. They were completely still. No fidgeting, no nervous tapping, and absolutely zero tremors. It was the distinct calm of someone who had learned to sit through significantly worse storms. You performed out there today like someone who has executed these exact procedures 1,000 times before. Agent Briggs said, his voice dropping low. Somewhere else entirely. Maya met his steady gaze. People learn fast in a crisis. Agent Briggs shook his head slowly. Not like that, they don't. Agent Alvarez tapped the screen of the tablet again. Do you recognize the term Project Shadow Eclipse? The entire room tightened up instantly. Maya did not offer an answer. Agent Briggs held the heavy silence, letting it stretch out as long as possible, letting it pull at the tension in the air. Project Shadow Eclipse, he said clearly. A highly classified special operations mission. Helmand Province. Officially listed as a total failure. Maya's eyes flicked once to the side, then instantly returned to total stillness. Agent Alvarez turned the tablet around, so the bright screen faced Maya directly. A heavily redacted federal report filled the entire display. Names were completely blacked out with thick digital ink, dates were partially obscured, and images were blurred to protect things that could no longer be protected by paper. One specific section was completely unblurred. A designation line, a formal status stamp that read, Kia presumed. Maya stared directly at the letters without a single change in her facial expression. The pale skin around her eyes tightened almost imperceptibly. The exact way a muscle remembered an incredibly old injury. Agent Briggs watched her with absolute focus. That specific file legally should not exist in the civilian world, Ms. Vance. Yet, when your name was entered into a standard hospital trauma log this morning, it lit up across multiple federal networks like a flare in the dark. Maya's voice was incredibly quiet. So, you came here to put the flare out. Agent Alvarez's tone sharpened to an edge. We came here because a human being officially listed as dead for years just suddenly reappeared inside a level 1 trauma center and saved 7 lives using techniques that make absolutely zero sense for a first-year residency nurse. Maya's jaw tightened until the muscles flexed. Dead people don't get state nursing licenses. Agent Briggs nodded his head slightly. Exactly. That is precisely what makes your existence so interesting to us. The metal door handle suddenly rattled violently, and then the heavy door was thrown open hard enough to slam against the drywall. Dr. Vance stepped straight into the room, his face pale with pure anger, his white lab coat smeared with dark blood near the cuff. Sharon's warning had clearly not held him back. This is absolute madness. Dr. Vance snapped fiercely. If you are standing here implying any form of clinical misconduct, you can speak directly to our hospital's legal counsel. This nurse just single-handedly saved 7 human lives on my floor. Agent Briggs did not move an inch from his chair. We are absolutely not implying a single shred of clinical misconduct, Doctor. Dr. Vance pointed a finger at the tablet held in Agent Alvarez's hand. Then what exactly are you implying? Agent Alvarez's voice stayed perfectly controlled. We are implying total systemic inconsistency. Dr. Vance's eyes flicked rapidly to Maya's face. Inconsistency. Agent Briggs spoke again, his voice calm, almost gentle. Doctor, we ran her name through high-level federal identification systems. That is absolutely not something our office does for fun on a Thursday morning. Dr. Vance's throat moved as he swallowed hard. He looked exactly like a man who had spent the last hour fighting physics and blood loss, and now suddenly realized that the next fight was entirely invisible. Maya did not look at Dr. Vance for long. She kept her gaze fixed entirely on Agent Briggs. You came here incredibly fast. Agent Briggs nodded. Because the alert system is entirely automated. The exact millisecond your name was logged, it flagged across multiple agencies. Maya's voice stayed perfectly level. Then you already know that this conversation is absolutely not going to go where you think it will. Agent Alvarez's eyes narrowed. Meaning what exactly? Maya leaned back slowly in her chair. The physical movement was incredibly small, but it completely changed her posture from cooperative to entirely controlled. Meaning that if you are here to accuse me of a crime, you are entirely late. And if you are here to protect something, you are entirely early. That specific comment made Agent Briggs pause. His expression did not change much, but his overall attention sharpened to a point. Dr. Vance looked back and forth between them, desperately trying his best to track the hidden language of federal threats without being fluent in it. Agent Briggs's voice dropped down to a low whisper. You think we are not the only ones who noticed the flag? Maya's eyes stayed fixed on his face. I know for a fact you aren't. Agent Alvarez's fingers tightened hard around the edges of the tablet. Who else noticed? Maya's mouth curved slightly in something that was absolutely not a smile. If you actually had that answer, you wouldn't be sitting in a hospital consultation room asking me. Dr. Vance took a step closer to the table, his voice full of frustration. Maya, what is this? Who are they talking about? Maya did not look at him. Not right now, Doctor. Dr. Vance's voice broke with anger. Not right now? Are you kidding me? Agent Briggs held up a hand firmly, not to silence Dr. Vance, but to keep him from stepping directly into a trap he could not see. Doctor, I fully understand that this feels like a federal ambush, but we have an incredible reason to be highly cautious. Dr. Vance glared. Cautious? You show up on my trauma deck with badges and a dead file, and you want cautious? Agent Alvarez finally turned her full attention to the surgeon. Your hospital digitally recorded her clinical actions in real time. Your staff entered her name into the system. That action triggered a high-level federal alert. We didn't choose the timing today, Doctor. The timing chose us. Dr. Vance's chest rose and fell once hard. He looked back down at Maya. Tell me you have a logical explanation for this. Maya's eyes softened just enough to show she heard him. Ido. Then give it to me, Dr. Vance said, his voice dropping low. Maya's gaze returned to Agent Briggs. Do you want my actual past, or do you want the redacted version of it that you can easily file away in a drawer? Agent Briggs held her stare. We want to know exactly why a person officially declared dead is walking around Kansas City with a clean nursing license and a brand new life. Maya sat perfectly still. For a brief moment, she looked significantly less like a nurse and far more like a seasoned operator waiting out a massive artillery storm under cover. Then she spoke, and her voice was so calm it made the words sound incredibly heavy. "I didn't disappear because I wanted to," she said. "I disappeared because it was the only way to stay alive." Agent Alvarez's eyes flicked, a quick, involuntary sign of intense interest. Agent Briggs did not interrupt. Maya continued. "My entire unit was officially declared lost, wiped completely from the federal record. Every single name was marked as killed in action. That was the official deal." Dr. Vance froze in place. "Unit." Agent Briggs spoke quietly. "Special Operations Medical Detachment, Navy." The words landed in the small room like a dropped weight. Dr. Vance's face changed completely. The part of him that lived entirely in the civilian world did not know exactly where to put that information, but the part of him that knew trauma and knew what kind of hands saved lives under impossible conditions suddenly understood why her calm felt so wrong. Dr. Vance's voice was almost a whisper. "You were military special operations." Maya finally looked at him, her eyes looking incredibly tired, not from the hours spent in the trauma bay, but from years of carrying a secret. "I kept people alive when there were absolutely no hospitals nearby, doctor," she said. "When there was no blood bank available. When asking for permission was a luxury we couldn't afford." Agent Alvarez tapped her tablet again, pulling up another page of the report. "Your status is officially listed as Kia presumed. That is absolutely not a clerical error. That file was signed and locked down by a federal judge." Maya's voice stayed perfectly even. "It was supposed to stay locked." Agent Briggs leaned back slightly. "And yet here you are." Maya nodded. "And yet 7 people are actively breathing out there." Agent Alvarez's eyes sharpened. "You were trained under highly classified conditions. Your clinical skills are absolutely not civilian. Your very existence was buried for a critical reason." Maya's jaw tightened. "My existence was buried because people in high positions of power didn't like what my unit saw." Dr. Vance took a step back from the table, looking as if the entire room had just tilted on its axis. "What you saw?" Maya did not answer him directly. She looked straight at Agent Briggs. "You are here confirming something, Agent. You aren't investigating it." Agent Briggs's gaze held steady. "We are confirming that the person listed on this classified report is indeed you." Maya's eyes dropped down to the tablet for a heartbeat, then lifted again. "Then confirm it." Agent Alvarez's thumb hovered over the screen, then swiped quickly. A blurred identification image appeared, partially redacted. The face was obscured, but the overall shape of the skull, the line of the jaw, and the intense eyes beneath the blur suggested what the truth already did. Agent Briggs spoke softly. "Your reappearance triggered federal alerts that are older than our local office. They touch systems that don't answer to us." Maya's stomach tightened up in a way that did not show on her face at all. "Who else received the alert?" Agent Briggs's eyes did not leave her face. "People who have spent the last 5 years making absolutely sure Project Shadow Eclipse stayed buried in the dirt." Dr. Vance swallowed hard, looking terrified. "In a hospital? You think someone is actually coming here to this building?" Agent Alvarez's voice was perfectly controlled, but it carried a dangerous edge. "We think you should assume that the exact microsecond she resurfaced, she became a massive signal in the dark." Maya's hands remained perfectly flat on the wood. "Signals can be jammed." Agent Briggs's eyebrows lifted. "Can they really?" Maya did not offer an answer. The consultation room door suddenly opened a crack, and a young nurse poked her head inside, her face drawn tight with lingering adrenaline. "Dr. Vance," she said quickly. "All 7 trauma patients are officially stable. The families are gathering out there, and they are frantically asking who exactly saved their children." Dr. Vance's gaze flicked down to Maya, then back to the nurse. "Tell them I will step out to speak with them very soon." The nurse hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting nervously to the federal badges, then left the room. The room went quiet again. Agent Alvarez set the tablet down on the table, turning it slightly toward Maya. looking like an offer and a threat at the exact same time. "We need names, Ms. Vance," she said. "We legally need to know exactly where the rest of your Special Operations Unit is located. We need to know how a person declared dead managed to build a clean civilian life without leaving a single digital trace." Maya's voice stayed perfectly level. "You are standing here asking me to dig up graves that were never meant to be opened." Agent Briggs's tone hardened to an edge. "The graves opened themselves the exact microsecond you walked into that trauma bay, and moved like you never left the field." Dr. Vance's eyes narrowed. "She moved like someone who was highly trained to save lives, Agent. That does not make her a criminal." Agent Alvarez turned her sharp gaze to the surgeon. "Doctor, we are absolutely not calling her a criminal." Dr. Vance's voice rose to a scream. "Then why are you talking to her like you might handcuff her at any moment?" Agent Briggs answered without looking away from Maya's face. "Because we don't know exactly who else is watching this building right now. And we don't know if the people who originally buried her will prefer her alive or completely silent." Dr. Vance's face went completely pale. He glanced nervously at the closed door, as if he could see straight through the solid wood. Maya's eyes did not move an inch. "They won't come through the front entrance," she said flatly. Agent Alvarez blinked in surprise. "What?" Maya's voice was perfectly calm and factual. "If someone wants to eliminate me, they are absolutely not going to walk through the lobby and flash a badge. They will actively use noise and confusion. They will let you think it is nothing more than your own internal hospital chaos." Agent Briggs held her stare. "You speak like someone who has run those exact tactical scenarios before." Maya's mouth tightened. "I have lived them." Dr. Vance swallowed hard. "Maya, how long have you been running?" Maya looked at him, and this time, the immense exhaustion in her eyes was clearer than ever. "Long enough, Doctor." Dr. Vance's voice dropped down to a whisper. "Why here? Why did you choose Oak Ridge Memorial?" Maya's answer was incredibly simple. "Because I desperately wanted a life where my hands could help people without being owned by a government." Agent Alvarez's fingers drummed once on the wooden table, then stopped. "And you genuinely thought you could do that while being dead on paper?" Maya leaned forward slightly. Being dead was the only way to be entirely free. Agent Briggs watched her for a long moment, then nodded his head once as if a piece of a puzzle had finally clicked into place. "You should know something, Ms. Vance," he said. Maya did not react. "Say it." Agent Briggs's voice dropped low. "The federal alert that brought our office here today is absolutely not limited to the FBI. It touched foreign networks and private contractor systems. We cannot guarantee who saw your name." Maya's jaw tightened. "Then you came here to warn me." Agent Briggs's expression stayed completely unreadable. "We came here to make sure we weren't the last people to know." Dr. Vance's hands curled tightly into fists. "So what happens now? You just leave and she is supposed to go right back to working a shift?" Agent Alvarez looked at the surgeon. "We are absolutely not pulling her nursing license today, doctor. We are not handcuffing her in front of terrified families. We are not that careless." Agent Briggs stood up smoothly, pushing his chair back without a sound. "But we are absolutely not done here." Maya stood up too, her movements perfectly fluid and controlled, her shoulders squared. "You got exactly what you needed from me." Agent Briggs held her gaze. "Not yet, we haven't." Agent Alvarez picked up her tablet. "We will." They moved toward the door. Dr. Vance stepped directly into their path. "If you come back onto my trauma deck like this again, I will have hospital legal counsel involved instantly." Agent Briggs paused, looking at Dr. Vance with a rare hint of genuine respect. "Doctor, keep your patients alive. That is your specific war." Then his sharp eyes returned to Maya's face. "You should know one last thing, Vance," Agent Briggs said. Maya waited. The agent's voice lowered, the words aimed straight like a blade. "Saving 7 lives in an hour wasn't what actually caught our attention today." Maya's eyes narrowed. "Then what did?" Agent Briggs's expression did not change, but his tone carried the heavy weight of total certainty. "The fact that you executed those procedures like you never stopped fighting." He turned the handle, opened the door, and walked out into the corridor with Agent Alvarez, their footsteps completely quiet on the tile. Their badges disappeared around the corner, as if they had never been there at all. Maya remained standing in the middle of the small consultation room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air felt noticeably thinner. Dr. Vance looked at her like he was seeing her for the very first time in his life. "Are you still my residency nurse?" he asked, his voice low. Maya's eyes met his. Her answer was incredibly simple, and it held significantly more truth than any classified federal file. "I am still a nurse, doctor," she said. "That is the only part of my identity that actually matters inside this building." Dr. Vance stared at her, actively struggling with intense anger. "Oh, and something closer to raw fear. They officially said you were dead." Maya's gaze drifted away for a brief heartbeat, then returned to his face. "I was," she said quietly, "on paper." Outside the small room, the hospital kept moving forward, but the overall rhythm had changed completely. Conversations cut off instantly whenever she passed a doorway. Smartphones buzzed continuously with text messages that did not have names attached to them. Hospital security guards lingered at intersections where they normally never stood. It was the exact kind of subtle tightening that happened when wild animals sensed a massive storm long before they ever saw the clouds in the sky. Maya stepped out into the hallway and felt the tension deep in her bones. The exact way she had felt trouble coming long before a police siren ever reached the ambulance doors. The hallway located outside administration smelled entirely different than the trauma deck. It smelled significantly less of blood, and more of cheap carpet glue and printer toner, looking as if the building were desperately trying to pretend it was a boring office instead of a high-stakes place where human beings came apart. Maya walked through the corridor anyway, her shoes still damp at the edges from the morning rain, her sleeves heavily marked with dried stains she had not earned by her own injury, but only by close proximity to disaster. Nurses looked up as she passed, then looked away far too quickly. A unit clerk stopped mid-sentence on a phone call. Two orderlies paused with an empty gurney as if the tile floor had suddenly become entirely uncertain beneath their feet. Dr. Vance followed a few steps behind her, keeping his physical pace measured, trying his absolute best not to turn the situation into a scene, but failing completely anyway because every single person on the floor could feel his intense energy. He was a man heavily used to being the loudest authority in any room. And now he was rapidly learning what it felt like when authority wore a tailored suit and spoke in a whisper. "Maya," he said quietly. She did not stop walking. "Doctor." He caught up to her side near the main supply room, where the heavy wooden door had a deep dent from years of equipment. He lowered his voice down to a whisper. "Tell me exactly what you need right now." Maya's eyes stayed focused entirely on the hall ahead. "What I need is for this hospital to keep being a hospital." Dr. Vance's jaw tightened. "That is absolutely not a real answer." "It is the only answer that actually matters right now, doctor," she said. He held her gaze for a moment, then glanced past her shoulder to the main ER floor, where the clinical rhythm had resumed but had absolutely not recovered. "The trauma patients are still stable." Maya nodded once. "For now they are." Dr. Vance watched her face, actively searching for a single sign of fear. He found something significantly heavier than fear, a steady, unbroken vigilance that did not turn off just because the physiological monitors were glowing green. "When you said you were officially dead on paper," he said quietly, "what does that actually mean?" Maya's mouth tightened. "It means I learned the hard way that federal paperwork can kill a person significantly faster than bullets." Dr. Vance exhaled a sharp breath through his nose. "You are standing here telling me that the federal government says you died in Afghanistan, and you simply came home and became a nurse in Kansas City." "I am telling you that the federal government says a lot of things, doctor," Maya replied flatly. "Sometimes it is true. Sometimes it is useful." Dr. Vance leaned closer, his voice dropping lower. "Are you in immediate danger right now?" Maya looked at him, then really looked into his eyes. And for the very first time all morning, he saw the immense volume of exhaustion hidden right behind her calm mask. "If I answer that question honestly," she said, "you will start trying to protect me in ways that will put your own patients at risk." Dr. Vance's eyes hardened. "I protect my patients by protecting my staff." Maya's gaze drifted past him to the corridor intersection, noting the security camera, noting the convex mirror. Then protect your trauma bay by keeping it incredibly boring, she said. No clinical drama, no hero speeches, and absolutely zero decisions made out of personal pride. Dr. Vance's brow furrowed. You think personal pride is the immediate threat here? Maya's voice stayed perfectly level. I think people who can't stand the thought of being embarrassed are the most dangerous people on earth. Before Dr. Vance could offer a response, Colleen Hayes appeared suddenly at the corner. Her smartphone held tightly in her hand, her expression set in that flat, tight shape it always took when she was trying her absolute best not to explode in anger. You two are needed immediately, she said, her voice clipped. Hospital administration wants Vance in the boardroom right now. Maya did not flinch. For what? Colleen's voice was sharp. Institutional liability, public optics. They want to know exactly what kind of bomb they are sitting on. Dr. Vance started forward instantly. She is absolutely not a bomb, Colleen. Colleen looked at him like he had completely missed the entire point of the morning. In a level 1 hospital, Garrett, anything that can get you sued into absolute rubble might as well be. They walked together down the long executive corridor. The farther they moved from the active trauma bay, the quieter it got, but the quiet felt significantly worse. Quiet meant people had time to think, and thinking turned raw fear into wild rumor. Inside the main conference room, the director of clinical operations sat right at the head of the long table. Her hands folded neatly, her face carefully neutral. Institutional legal counsel sat to her right, a laptop open, her eyes sharp as needles. HR sat to her left, already visibly sweating through his white collar. Two men Maya did not recognize stood quietly near the large window, watching her like she was an uncomfortable question they did not want asked out loud. The director gestured to an empty chair. Ms. Vance, thank you for coming up. Maya did not sit down immediately. She looked directly at the two unfamiliar men by the window. Who exactly are they? The director smiled faintly, a corporate gesture. Consultants. Dr. Vance stepped in right behind her, squaring his shoulders. I am staying for this meeting. Legal counsel lifted a hand firmly. Dr. Vance, we appreciate your clinical involvement this morning, but this is strictly an employment matter. Dr. Vance's voice stayed cold as ice. It became my explicit matter the exact microsecond you needed her hands to keep your trauma bay from becoming an absolute morgue. The director's smile stiffened up. Doctor. Maya sat down smoothly. It was significantly easier that way. It made corporate people feel like they were in total control of the room. The director cleared her throat loudly. First, we want to formally acknowledge what occurred on the floor this morning. The overall clinical outcome was extraordinary. Maya's eyes stayed steady. The outcome was human beings staying alive. That is our job. That is exactly what I mean, the director said quickly, then paused as if mentally weighing every single word. We also legally need to acknowledge that there are serious concerns. Concerns about my scope of practice, about formal authorization, and about what your malpractice insurance company will say, Maya finished for her. Legal counsel's lips pressed together tightly. We are absolutely not accusing you of any wrongdoing, Ms. Vance. We are simply clarifying institutional risk. Maya leaned back slightly in her chair. Risk is 7 critical trauma patients arriving at once with absolutely no attending surgeon available. Risk is arguing over paperwork while a teenager actively bleeds to death on a table. One of the unfamiliar men by the window stepped forward into the light. His suit was entirely too well tailored for hospital administration. His tone of voice was incredibly smooth. Your clinical skills are absolutely not typical for a resident, Ms. Vance, he said. They are highly specialized. Maya's gaze lifted to his face. So are Dr. Vance's skills. Do you want to put him in an institutional box too? The man's smile was razor thin. Dr. Vance's skills are thoroughly documented and credentialed through standard civilian channels. Yours appear to come from elsewhere entirely. Dr. Vance's jaw tightened. You don't know what her training is. The man looked at the surgeon with mild patience. We have incredible reason to suspect it is classified military. The room tightened up instantly. The HR representative shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Legal counsel watched Maya like she was a witness on a stand. Maya's voice stayed perfectly calm. My state nursing license is valid. Legal counsel nodded. Yes, it is. But federal agents just walked into our emergency department and asked for you explicitly by name. That creates an immense amount of institutional risk. Maya looked directly at the director. Your risk is a temporary local headline. The director's eyes flicked away instantly. Our risk is absolutely everything. Our patients, our staff, and our legal ability to operate. Maya's mouth tightened into something almost like amusement. Though it was not warm. Your physical ability to operate this morning was my hands. Dr. Vance leaned forward, placing his palms flat on the table. If you are trying to intimidate her, stop right now. If you are trying to protect this hospital, start by deeply appreciating what she just accomplished. The director's voice softened, becoming incredibly careful. Ms. Vance, we legally need to know if you pose a danger to this facility. Maya held her gaze. Today I was the exact opposite of a danger. One of the consultants shifted his weight. We are absolutely not talking about today, he said. We are talking about what follows you from your past. Maya's eyes hardened to flint. If something follows me from my past, sir, it will absolutely not care about your institutional policies. The room went completely quiet. Legal counsel closed her laptop slowly, looking as if she were ending a meeting that had moved far beyond the legal tools she trusted. The director's voice was significantly quieter when she spoke again. We can place you on immediate administrative leave while we evaluate the situation. Dr. Vance's head snapped up in anger. No. Maya's gaze stayed fixed on the director's face. Do exactly what you need to do, she said. But keep your trauma bay fully staffed. People will still bleed regardless of your leave. Colleen Hayes suddenly opened the boardroom door without knocking, her face looking completely pale and tight. Director, she said, her voice shaking. The families are down on the floor right now asking for Vance. They refuse to leave until they see her. The director blinked in confusion. Why? Colleen's voice cracked slightly under the weight of the emotion. Because their children are alive. Because they desperately want a human name to put their gratitude on. Maya stood up smoothly. Let them see their people, Colleen, she said. Not me. Colleen swallowed hard. They already know your name, Maya. Maya did not offer an answer. She walked straight out of the room before the conference room could turn her identity into a corporate debate. If you want to see how this high-stakes standoff ends, smash that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts below because the final confrontation is about to explode. In the hallway located right outside the emergency room, a woman rushed toward her, tears streaming down her cheeks, her hands trembling violently. Are you Maya? She asked, her voice cracking. Maya stopped completely. The woman's eyes were wide with that raw, unfiltered fear that always lived directly under massive gratitude. My son, the woman said, grabbing her arm. They told me he was gone. Then they told me a nurse wouldn't let him go. Maya's throat moved as she swallowed. She glanced past the woman to the crowded waiting room, seeing the families clustered together like they were holding each other up. He is alive, Maya said clearly. The woman grabbed her hand tightly. Thank you so much. Maya did not pull her hand away. She held the woman's hand firmly, steadying the violent tremor like she had studied pulses all morning long. Stay with him, she said softly. Keep him talking to you. Don't let him drift into sleep if the floor nurse tells you not to. The woman nodded hard, looking as if she would obey absolutely anything that sounded certain. Dr. Vance watched the interaction from a few steps behind her, and something fundamental shifted in his expression. He had seen clinical gratitude 1,000 times before in his long career, but he had also seen the exact way Maya accepted it without enjoying a single drop of it, looking as if praise was just another heavy weight she was being forced to carry. Then the air pressure changed again. It was incredibly subtle at first, a slight difference in the way voices carried down the hall, the way footsteps sounded on the hard tile. Hospital security guards appeared suddenly at major intersections where there had been absolutely none minutes ago. A heavy fire door near medical records that was usually propped wide open was now shut tight. Maya felt the shift in her skin instantly. She turned her head slightly, her eyes scanning without making the movement obvious to the crowd. Colleen moved closer to her side. You feel that change too, Vance? The charge nurse muttered. Maya's gaze stayed fixed forward. Yes. Colleen swallowed. The FBI came back. Maya's eyes flicked once. Where are they? Colleen nodded toward the isolated corridor by medical records. It's absolutely not the same agents from earlier. These ones look like they came for tactical work, not questions. Dr. Vance stepped forward aggressively. I'll handle them. Maya stopped him instantly with a look that made the surgeon hesitate. Not because she commanded him, but because the look carried years of lived combat knowledge. Let me handle this, doctor, Maya said. They walked together toward the secure medical records wing. The hallway there was significantly narrower and quieter. The lights buzzed faintly. The heavy door to the secure archive area had an electronic keypad. A hospital security guard stood directly in front of it with his hands clasped tightly, his eyes fixed firmly ahead. 2 agents waited quietly near the door. One was significantly older, with close-cropped hair and a face heavily lined with experience. The other was much younger, her eyes constantly moving, scanning the corridor. Their official badges were already clearly visible on their belts. No theatrics needed. The older agent spoke first. Maya Vance. Maya came to a halt at a comfortable distance. Yes. He held up his badge clearly. Senior Special Agent Mark Halverson. This is Agent Layla Chun. We legally need you inside this room immediately. Dr. Vance stepped up right beside her. Who authorized you to lock down our records wing? Agent Halverson looked at the surgeon briefly. Federal authority, doctor. We are absolutely not here to disrupt active patient care. Dr. Vance's voice was sharp as a needle. You already did. Maya kept her tone perfectly level. What do you want from me? Agent Halverson's sharp eyes stayed fixed on hers. We cross-checked Project Shadow Eclipse. Maya did not react outwardly in the slightest. Agent Halverson nodded his head slightly as if confirming something to himself. Your unit was officially declared dead on paper. No physical remains were ever recovered. No confirmaciones. 0 follow-up from the Pentagon. That was the entire point of the designation, Agent, Maya said flatly. Agent Chen stepped forward, her gaze intense. Where are the rest of them located? Maya did not answer her. Agent Halverson's voice tightened to an edge. This isn't about your past actions in theater, Vance, he said. It's about why that specific past was buried so deep it took a mass casualty trauma log to dig it back up. Maya's jaw clenched until the muscles flexed. You don't understand what you are asking. Agent Chen's eyes narrowed into slits. We understand enough to know that someone built a massive federal system to completely erase your identity. Systems like that don't exist for fun. Agent Halverson gestured toward the keypad. Inside. We are absolutely not conducting this high-level brief in a public hallway. The security guard quickly entered the code, and the door opened. The electronic lock released with a heavy, metallic sound that felt incredibly final. Maya stepped inside. Dr. Vance followed right behind her, then stopped completely when Agent Halverson lifted a hand firmly. Doctor, Agent Halverson said. This is strictly a federal matter. Dr. Vance's eyes narrowed. So is my hospital. Maya looked back at Dr. Vance. Stay close, doctor, she said quietly. But don't say a word unless you absolutely have to. Dr. Vance did not like being instructed by a residency nurse, but he nodded his head once anyway. Inside the secure archives wing, the air smelled intensely of old paper and cold ventilation. The overhead lights were significantly brighter. Digital security cameras were mounted in every single corner. A cold metal table sat directly in the center of the small room, looking far more utilitarian than the consultation room had been. There were 2 chairs, with a third pushed back as if someone had just stood up rapidly. Agent Halverson shut the door tight. Agent Chen stood near the wall, her arms folded tightly, her gaze sharp as a needle. Agent Halverson set a thick folder down on the table. We pulled the official after-action reports tied directly to Project Shadow Eclipse, he said. Your clinical techniques on the floor this morning matched those reports perfectly. Field surgery under intense mortar fire. Improvised stabilization. Advanced decision-making with absolutely zero backup. Maya's voice was low and cold, because there was never any backup coming for us. Agent Halverson opened the folder, and slid a grainy photo across the table. It was dark, with a dusty night vision tint. A lone figure was bent deeply over a casualty in the dirt. The face was absolutely not clear, but the physical posture was undeniable. The exact angle of the shoulders, the positioning of the busy hands. Maya looked at the photo without blinking once. Agent Halverson watched her face intensely. Your entire unit went completely dark after a highly classified operation failed. It failed on paper, Maya said flatly. Agent Chen leaned in slightly from the wall. You completed the mission. Maya's eyes lifted to Agent Chen's face. We did. Agent Halverson's jaw worked. Then why were you completely erased from history? Maya's voice stayed perfectly controlled. Because we brought out people who were absolutely not supposed to be found alive. Agent Chen's eyes sharpened. High-value targets. High-value witnesses, Maya corrected. The single word hung heavily in the cold air of the room. Agent Halverson's tone of voice shifted. High-level intelligence. Maya did not offer an answer. She did not have to. The federal agents understood everything from her silence. Agent Chen exhaled a long breath. And did that intelligence successfully unravel what it was designed to unravel? Maya laughed once, a sharp, entirely humorless sound that died quickly in her throat. If it actually unraveled anything, Agent, I wouldn't be sitting in a hospital room today. Agent Halverson leaned forward over the table. Today gave absolute proof to the network. Proof your unit survived. Proof you are alive. Proof the extraction was completely real. Maya's gaze hardened to flint. So, you are worried someone will come here to eliminate me. Agent Halverson's sharp eyes stayed fixed on hers. We are worried someone will come here to eliminate anyone connected to what your unit saw. Dr. Vance's voice cut in, low and incredibly tight. This is absolute madness. You are talking like a level 1 hospital is an active combat zone. Agent Chen looked at the surgeon, her eyes cold. Hospitals become targets when they hold the wrong people, doctor. Maya's eyes drifted to the door, then to the security camera mounted in the corner. Her breathing stayed perfectly level. Agent Halverson tapped the folder. Where are the others located? Maya met his gaze. They are alive. Agent Chen's eyes wide slightly, just a tiny crack in her professional control. You said that like you know for a fact. Maya nodded her head once. I know. Agent Halverson's voice lowered. Then you're the absolute best medic they had. Maya's mouth tightened. No. Agent Chen leaned forward. The fastest medic in the detachment. Maya shook her head slowly. I was the fastest. Agent Halverson watched her carefully. Why exactly does that matter? Because speed is the explicit reason people lived out there, Maya said. And speed is the explicit reason I am standing here today. A strange sound suddenly cut straight through the building. It was absolutely not a standard medical alarm. It was a low, pulsing, electronic tone that most hospital staff would easily mistake for a routine system test. It rolled through the long hallway like an unspoken warning, trying its absolute best not to be noticed by the public. Maya's body reacted instantly before her mind had even finished naming the sound. Her shoulders set hard, her breathing slowed down, and her eyes sharpened to an edge. Agent Halverson straightened up instantly. Agent Chen's hand moved subtly toward the inside of her jacket. Dr. Vance frowned deeply. What is that alarm? Maya's voice was a quiet whisper. Perimeter breach. Agent Halverson's gaze snapped directly to Agent Chen. Confirm it. Agent Chen pressed 2 fingers firmly to an electronic earpiece that Dr. Vance had not noticed until now. Source. Then she listened intently, her face going completely still and pale. North entrance. Parking structure, level 2. Unidentified tactical personnel bypassing security checkpoints right now. Dr. Vance's face drained of color. Who exactly would bypass hospital security? Maya did not answer him with a theory. She moved instantly. She stepped directly to the door and threw it open. The hallway outside was already shifting rapidly, staff turning their heads in confusion, security guards moving with sudden purpose. Maya walked rapidly toward the nurse's station and reached out for the emergency radio resting on the counter. She picked it up like it belonged to her. Her thumb pressed the transmit button firmly. All morning collision patients, she said into the microphone, her voice remaining perfectly calm, clear, and authoritative. Move them to different wings immediately. I want the intensive care staff to step down anywhere with controlled electronic access. Do it completely quietly right now. A nurse stared at her in utter shock. We didn't get an official medical order for a lockdown. Maya met her eyes. You just did. The nurse swallowed hard and moved instantly. Colleen appeared suddenly at the edge of the station, her eyes wide with fear. Vance, what are you doing? Maya did not look at her long. Keeping them alive, Colleen. The charge nurse's mouth opened, then closed. Then, she snapped into immediate action, barking orders at transport staff, at security guards, at anyone who could move a patient bed without tipping it over. Dr. Vance stood frozen for a heartbeat, watching the entire hospital shift around Maya the exact way the trauma bay had earlier. His expression changed completely, absolute realization settling in with the heavy weight of undeniable fact. This was absolutely not a residency nurse stepping out of her lane. This was someone stepping smoothly back into a lane she had left behind years ago. Agent Halverson and Agent Chen moved rapidly into the corridor, their eyes scanning. Agent Chen's voice was low into her microphone. Confirm total number. A crackle of static replied. Agent Chen's face tightened. Unknown number. Maya's jaw clenched. That is the absolute worst answer. In the intensive care corridor, nurses were already moving beds rapidly, intravenous poles rattling loudly, family members looking completely confused and terrified. A man tried to step directly into the path of a moving gurney. A nurse blocked him, her voice shaking with fear. Maya moved smoothly between them, not pushing, not yelling, just guiding with the absolute authority of calm. Sir, she said to the man, her voice steady and warm. Stay with your wife. Keep her talking to you. If you get separated in this hall, you slow everyone down. The man froze in place, looked at her face, and nodded quickly, completely soothed by the certainty in her voice. Agent Halverson watched her work, then looked back at Dr. Vance. She is absolutely not guessing. Vance's jaw tightened. I know. A code blue alert echoed somewhere deeper in the hospital. A young nurse started to run in panic. Agent Halverson snapped. Lock down the stairwells right now. Security moved instantly. Then Dr. Vance's phone vibrated violently. He checked the screen, his face tightening even further. Trauma Bay 3, he said, his voice dropping. The 7th patient. He is officially awake. Maya stopped moving for the very first time since the low alarm had begun. He is awake, she repeated, her voice low. Dr. Vance nodded his head, his eyes fixed on the screen. And he is explicitly asking for you. Asking for me by name? Maya's stomach dropped down, though she did not show a single sign of it on her face. Agent Halverson's gaze sharpened instantly. How would he know her name? Agent Chen asked. Dr. Vance swallowed hard. That is exactly what I was hoping your office would explain to me. They moved with immense speed, weaving through the crowded corridor. Nurses parted instinctively to let them pass. The intensive care room door was half open. Inside the room, the 7th trauma patient lay propped up against the pillows, heavily bandaged but alive in a way that felt like a direct challenge to the laws of the universe. His eyes were wide open. They tracked directly to Maya the exact microsecond she stepped into view. His mouth pulled into something resembling a smile, weak but completely real. Doc, he rasped out, his voice rough as sandpaper. I didn't think I'd ever see you again in this life. The entire room went completely cold. Agent Halverson's physical posture stiffened up. Agent Chen's hand moved again, subtle, ready to draw. Maya froze in place for a heartbeat, her face remaining controlled, but her eyes changing completely. A flicker of something incredibly old passing behind them like a dark shadow. The patient coughed violently, winced in pain, then kept going. Know her, he said to the room, his voice scraping. She single-handedly kept half of our detachment breathing in Bagram. Dr. Vance's breath caught in his throat. Agent Halverson's gaze snapped directly to Maya. You explicitly said your unit was erased, Agent Halverson said quietly. Maya looked at the man on the bed, then looked back at the federal agent. I said we were erased, Agent, she replied, her voice dropping. I never said we were forgotten. The patient's smile widened a fraction, then faded quickly as intense pain pulled at his face. The clock is actively ticking again, Doc, he murmured, his eyes still locked onto hers. Before anyone in the room could ask what he meant, the low, pulsing security tone shifted completely. It grew significantly louder. Not in physical volume, but in sheer urgency, looking as if the automated system had stopped pretending it was a test. A loud shout echoed down the hall. There was a sound of a physical scuffle, followed by a silence that came entirely too fast. Maya's head turned toward the sound instantly. Her body angled toward the corridor without a single conscious thought. Agent Halverson stepped directly into her path. Stay inside this room. Maya's eyes were hard as concrete. Someone just officially breached your federal perimeter, Agent. Agent Chen's voice came into her microphone, clipped and urgent. Contact near medical records. One down. Dr. Vance's eyes widened in horror. One down. Maya moved anyway, smoothly stepping right around Agent Halverson's shoulder. They are absolutely not here to negotiate with you, she said. In the corridor ahead, a man stepped smoothly into view. He wore plain clothes and had no visible weapon in his hands. He possessed a calm, easy smile that did not belong in a hospital under lockdown. He lifted a hand slightly, looking exactly like he was greeting an old friend at a diner. Maya, he said, his voice incredibly smooth. You always did move entirely too fast. The air in the hall went completely thin. Agent Halverson's hand went directly to his service weapon. Agent Chen's posture tightened up. Dr. Vance stared like his brain refused to accept the reality of the scene. Maya's blood went ice cold, not with raw fear, but with absolute recognition. Her voice was incredibly quiet. Silas Thorne. The man's smile widened, still incredibly sharp. Agent Halverson aimed his badge like it mattered. Identify yourself right now. Thorne's eyes flicked to Agent Halverson, looking highly amused. Then, he smoothly produced official credentials from his pocket that made the agent's physical posture change instantly, not relaxed but respectful in a way that looked like intense discomfort. Internal oversight, Thorne said lightly. Significantly above your pay grade, Agent. Dr. Vance's throat tightened. Do you know this man? He asked Maya. Maya's eyes stayed fixed entirely on Thorne's face. Yes, she said, her voice dropping. He is the explicit reason Project Shadow Eclipse disappeared from the world. Thorne's expression softened into something almost paternal. That hurts my feelings, Maya. I protected you out there. Maya's jaw tightened. You buried us alive. Thorne shrugged his shoulders slightly. I gave your unit a way out. Maya's voice dropped low. You gave yourself political cover. Agent Halverson's weapon stayed trained on his chest. Sir, this is a level 1 hospital. You legally need to leave this floor immediately. Thorne's smile did not move an inch. If I wanted this encounter to be loud, Agent, you'd already know about it. Maya took one step forward. Agent Halverson shifted his body to block her. Thorne's gaze stayed fixed on her face. You should have stayed dark, Maya, he said, his tone of voice gentle like advice. Instead, you saved 7 people in an hour and lit up every single federal system that was meticulously designed to forget you. Dr. Vance's voice was incredibly tight. What exactly do you want from her? Thorne finally glanced at the surgeon. Dr. Vance, he said smoothly. Thank you for keeping her hands busy this morning. Keeps the rest of the civilian world from asking uncomfortable questions. Dr. Vance's face hardened. You used my hospital. Thorne's smile returned to Maya. I found you. That is all that matters. A biological monitor inside a nearby room suddenly began to chirp faster and faster. A nurse's voice rose in pure panic. We're losing him. Maya's head snapped toward the sound instantly. Her deep clinical instincts fired. Thorne's voice followed, soft and sharp. Don't step in, Maya. Maya ignored him completely and stepped straight into the room. A morning collision patient was actively crashing, complications stacking up incredibly fast. His blood pressure was dropping, and his oxygen was highly unstable. The patient's eyes rolled back, his body trying its best to leave the world. A nurse looked up at Maya, looking completely desperate. We're losing him. Maya was already gloving her hands, her physical movements incredibly precise. No, she said quietly. We're absolutely not losing him. Her hands moved with controlled speed. She clamped a line, adjusted the pressure bags, and provided advanced airway support. Her voice cut straight through the panic like a line drawn clean. Give me the bag valve mask. Slow breaths, keep him warm, call for blood. The line stabilized on the screen. The monitor eased its tone. The rapid chirping slowed down into a predictable rhythm that let people breathe again. Maya exhaled once, controlled, then turned right back toward the doorway. Thorne stood there watching her, his eyes bright with something that looked exactly like pride.